calling this hearing to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor and also the Chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on City Services and Innovation Technology. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon Fios Channel 964. And we'll be taking public testimony at the end of the hearing. So if you're here in the chamber in person, please sign up over there in the corner on the sheets. And if you want to join us by video conference, email cora.montrond@boston.gov. That's cora.montrond@boston.gov. And you can sign up and Cora will get you the link. You also, if you're watching this after the fact and you want to send us some written testimony, we'll take that at ccc.csit@boston.gov. And when you are called for testimony, please state your name and affiliation or residence and limit your comments to just a couple of minutes just so we can make sure everybody gets in. Today's docket, the hearing is on docket 0154, order for a hearing on fire and emergency disaster relief services in the city of Boston. I'm joined here by my colleagues, Councilor Rusi Luijen at large, the lead sponsor of this docket, and Councilor Gigi Coletta, District 1. We'll also be joined by a few other colleagues momentarily, and I'll recognize them as they come in. We're delighted to be joined today by an administration panel with a number of different departments represented. So Commissioner Paul Burke of the Boston Fire Department is with us, Connor Newman, Director at the Office of Neighborhood Services, Shumaine Benford, Shu, to most of us, Chief of Emergency Management, Danielle Johnson, Deputy Director of the Mayor's Office of Housing, and Eliza Wasserman, Director of the Office of Food Justice. So thank you all for being here. And before I go to the administration panel, I do just want to let Councilor Luijen and Councilor Coletta say a few opening words. So Councilor Luijen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the administration and everyone for being here, our panel afterwards. This is an important hearing, and I just want to say, first of all, thank you to all of you for the ways that you show up for our residents when they are experiencing deep, deep tragedy of losing their home, of losing a place that they return to every day with their children, and it is often a devastating and traumatic experience. And our firefighters are first on the line and put their lives on the line when responding to fires, and are also just very present in the lives of residents even after they are displaced. And so I want to first off by saying thank you to our first responders. Thank you, Commissioner, and to the many firefighters who also experience the trauma oftentimes of saving and unfortunate times not being able to save our residents in these difficult circumstances. This is an all hands on deck effort when our families are experiencing fires and the aftermath of a fire. This first came I first actively worked on this issue in 2011 as a student attorney when one of my clients was displaced by a fire, her and her 5 children. And it was a very, very difficult experience, and one where I was on the phone constantly with city and state services to make sure that she was getting the resources that she needs, and was in direct communication all the time with the fire department that was so gracious in helping me get the documents necessary for insurance, to make claims, and also to make sure that she was able to get affordable housing priority. So we know that our families, when they face these fires, it can often be a Herculean effort for them to get the resources they need, the culturally competent resources that they need. And so you sometimes see the GoFundMes rising up, and you see people having bake sales, as occurred in Mattapan when a family on Blue Avenue was displaced. Every year, small and medium-sized disasters occur without media attention, and these emergency situations can be incredibly difficult to manage when process and procedures for relief services are unknown. So we must find ways to support these smaller disasters to deliver fast and effective local humanitarian action. Today, I hope to learn more about the City of Boston's Emergency Assistance Fund for victims of fire or natural disaster, and to hear more from the city administration on best practices, and also to hear from the City of Cambridge on the work that they do when their residents are experiencing the aftermath of a fire. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the administration. I look forward to hearing your statements and then to questions.
Thank you so much, Councilor Luijen. Councilor Coletta?
Thank you, Chair Bach, and I want to thank my colleague, Councilor Luijen, for bringing this to the floor. I'm really excited about this hearing only because I've seen many of you in action to respond to service families and individuals who are going through some of the worst moments of their life. And so I just want to say thank you so much to the BFD, to Office of Housing, Food Justice and Access, and also ONS for what you do for our families every single day. I am looking forward to digging deep in this conversation and identifying and expanding what we do well, how quickly we mobilize, and figuring out maybe through the budget process how to get you more resources to expand those services, while also identifying some opportunities and some service gaps that the City of Boston can provide. I'm really excited to hear from the City of Cambridge about their fire relief fund. Largely in East Boston, this is where predominantly we see some of these incidents occur. In East Boston, fires will happen, and they've been happening more frequently. And largely, the victims are undocumented brothers and sisters of ours who don't have access to direct services. They don't speak English. They don't know exactly where to go and how to navigate the system. ONS has been incredible throughout this process, so I want to say thank you for that. But how can we be better to get this information out there, right? And servicing our families, giving them the holistic services that they actually need. And then separately from, or tangentially to this conversation, East Boston has also figured out a way to solicit funds through GoFundMe and disperse it equitably. And so I believe we're going to have somebody from East Boston Mutual Aid discuss that. But this is a good example of the community mobilizing and organizing for families where the city might fall short. So I look forward to getting into that conversation. Just thank you all so much for being here and what you do for the city every single day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coletta. We've also been joined by a co-sponsor of this docket, Councillor Liz Braden from District 9. Councillor Braden, we're just doing opening statements.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Wait, one moment. Cora's just going to get your mic.
May I organise?
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the panel who are here this morning. I apologise for my tardiness. I think this is a really important conversation. I know in our district we recognise all too often that we have incidents of emergencies, fire or floods that displace our families and residents in our district. And very often these incidents happen in the middle of the night, and many of our folks aren't from the neighbourhood. They don't have family and support systems. So every neighbourhood that experiences this has a slightly different angle on it. But I'm really looking forward to the conversation this morning to see if we can identify what works well, where there might be some deficits, and how we might improve the situation for all those folks who find them in this unfortunate situation. So I look forward to the conversation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. And I'll just say for my part that, I think this disaster response is really like the place where people most count on their government and city government, at the most local level. We're the ones that, get those first calls. And I think that, I think we have really remarkable first responders in this city: fire, police, EMS, and then I think in a lot of ways what this hearing is about, right, is also that like longer tail of sort of the challenge of continuing to support and follow up on a disaster, which, as we know, can really just have enormous ongoing effects in our community members' lives. And I've certainly seen that. I've had several cases, and I'm previewing this as a thing I might ask the panelists about. There's kind of this gray area when it's not caused by exactly a natural disaster, but for instance, like I had a building with a lot of tenants in affordable housing where the pipes burst and none of them had renters insurance, and their apartments flooded, and then they were out of the building for a while. And there's sort of, there's some things we expect of the property owner, but then those people are kind of left picking up the pieces, and we were sort of trying to put together a response just, with funds out of campaign accounts from local elected officials, and just kind of trying to pull things together. And I think a lot of us try to patch those support systems together, but I think it's really challenging to figure out how to provide that kind of backup to people in some of the worst times of their life. So looking forward to discussing that. And without further ado, I'll go over to the panel. And you can, Commissioner Burke is first on my list, but you guys can organize yourselves as you will.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank all your councilors for having this meeting. It's very important to us. So when there's a fire, we have a victims assistance unit that goes out to the fire scene, and their first objective is to make the tenants that got out of the building safe. In winter months, they'll either find an adjoining building, or we'll have the MBTA come in on with a bus, an empty bus or two, which is probably the only good thing the MBTA does. You know, they provide shelter during a catastrophe. But we do that, and then we take a head count to see how many people are displaced. And we call the Red Cross. And like the chairperson said, it's only for fires, for floods, which, in my opinion, floods affect more people. I've been to many water main breaks where in the south end, it floods bottom apartments, and there could be hundreds of people displaced by a flood, but the Red Cross does not respond to that. So that's definitely an area that needs to be looked at. So our people, they get the numbers, and they call the chief calls the Red Cross. The Red Cross comes out. They try first to get lodging through relatives or any other means they can find through the landlord. The landlord's liable, but they might not necessarily be on scene, or they might not help immediately. So the Red Cross will give them a voucher for hotels. So they give them a voucher and they find lodging. The voucher is for, I believe, $500. So that doesn't last more than 1 or 2 nights.
Yeah.
And that's it. We coordinate with Office of Neighborhood Services. We make sure everybody is, there's no injuries or anything like that. And then we get them the help we can get them through the Red Cross. But maybe the Office of Neighborhood Services has other provisions they could use when it comes to a flood. But flooding will house them in a bus or in an adjoining building, and then we'll have to pass it on to another agency because of the absence of the Red Cross. So.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And I want to note that we've been joined by colleagues, Councillor Michael Flaherty at large, who's also an original co-sponsor of this docket, and Council President Ed Flynn from District 2. I think we'll keep going with the panel, and I'll come back to you guys if that's all right. But so we just heard from Commissioner Burke. I'll go next to, unless, do you guys have an order? Otherwise, I'd go to Shu. Okay, great. Great, Chief Benson. Just, yeah, the Cora, can you get his, Ethan, can you get Chief Benson's mic? Thanks, great, perfect. You're good, you're good, Shu. Got it.
Good, okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the body for the opportunity to come and present, to share some details and some understanding around OEM's posture and how we respond and support our residents and those displaced by disaster. OEM, our primary mandate is really around 2 fronts. It's really around the coordinating function, and it's around maintaining our emergency operations plan. So when we talk about our coordinating function, we are very blessed and very fortunate in this city where we have very capable departments that have talented staff that support every day in this space. But when we get to and experience these instances where we have significant number of victims and or crisis that impacts larger neighborhoods or impacts the city operations on a larger level, OEM comes in and helps to coordinate in that space. And the example that I point to in the fire service, where when they get to these instances where they have multiple alarms, it really is all hands on deck, right? And we want to be able to support them in the moment so that they can focus on suppressing the fire. Where we come in is what types of assets, what types of resources do they need to carry out their primary mandate in that space. So OEM will come in during these major instances, during these major events to support the lead agency. Of course, obviously with fire, it's the fire department, but it could be a mass casualty event where we have mass injuries, and it could be EMS, right? And EMS supported by fire and other public safety entities. So there's a range of different instances in which we could have different departments that serve as the lead agency, but OEM would come in during those major instances in support. What do we do proactively is we maintain situational awareness, which is why we're under that public safety cabinet, because again, these events are unfolding in the moment, and we need to be there in a timely fashion to be able to support the response and support the victims moving forward. I would also point to our emergency operations plans, right? That serves as the basis and the benchmark for how we respond as a city. Again, we're very fortunate where we have just, talented public safety professionals that are well-trained and well-situated to respond. But we also have to have a playbook, right, for how do we do this in a coordinated fashion across city government. So we have our base plan and we have our emergency operations plan. And within our emergency operations plan, we have sections or chapters for which we refer to as annexes. And these annexes outline and talk about different instances, different crises, different experiences for which we do have these codified plans which articulate in greater detail how we respond as a city. So once OEM is on scene, one of our first steps is to engage the department that is the lead entity. And again, for the sake and the ease of conversation, we'll use a fire. So naturally, fire is going to be the lead department. So we would engage with fire on what is it that we can do to support you in that moment. We know that ultimately that range of coordination is going to make its way down to how we ultimately support our residents. But in terms of that initial response, it starts with that agency. They are there first. They're engaged in the moment. They're responding to the crisis, and it's around what do you need to support you in your primary mandate in suppressing the fire. And we know ultimately it's going to trickle down to the other departments that are on scene. So if it's one of those instances where OEM does respond, we have that initial conversation with the incident commander from the fire department, and then we start to coordinate with the other public safety officials that are on scene, as well as the other departments that we know are going to be critical for the wraparound and continuance of care and continuance of service for those residents. So the most logical and next step that we look to is to ensure that we have ONS that is going to be responding, has been notified, particularly through 311. We have a robust line of communication across individual relationships, but most often it's coordinated through 311, and we ensure that that neighborhood representative comes out to the scene, and that really serves as that next logical pass-off that we often see from the victim assistance unit that the commissioner's office, that the commissioner referenced, and then passed off to ONS for coordinating the next range of city services to support the residents and the constituents long-term.
Great, thank you so much, Chief Benson. Who would like to go next? Okay, we'll go to Connor from the Office of Neighborhood Services.
And I'll move the mic over.
That'd be great.
Thank you so much, Chief, and thank you, councilors, for having me here today. My name is Connor Newman. I serve as the Deputy Director for the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services, also known as ONS. I have the pleasure of serving Boston constituents and leading a team of neighborhood liaisons to support the people of Boston. So the Office of Neighborhood Services, in addition to its many responsibilities, it also has the duty of responding to emergency calls 24/7. Typically, the fire department or 911 would contact Boston 311, which would then give us a call. Liaisons have different parts of the city that they cover and would contact the on-call person to let them know that there's been some type of emergency that has occurred. If we get word that there are displacements, a liaison would then head out to that part of the city. Upon getting on the scene, we typically would first touch base with the chief from the fire department that's on scene, get a sense if there's already the victim's assistance unit that's present. We understand that the threshold that VAU responds to has actually been lowered, so we frequently coordinate with them when we arrive to the scene. We identify who exactly has been displaced from this fire. We understand if we check to make first that if anyone's already made contact with them, we're not kind of bothering them in this traumatic experience, but we approach them, we provide our business cards, and then we take down their information, how many people are in the apartment, apartment number, email, cell phone, as well as other details. Are there children? Are they PPS children? What is the age of the people impacted as well? And then we follow by asking, do you have a place to go tonight? Are you able to connect with family? Are you able to connect with friends? If they're truly bereft of having any contacts and having nowhere to go, we would take down their information, make sure we flag that for the Office of Housing Stability. If it's a fire, this is something that Red Cross can step in and assist with. So we would make sure that Red Cross has been contacted, and we would stay on the scene until we make sure that they've been able to link up with those that have been impacted. And they're provided with a gift card, which they can use to spend on resources on either getting a hotel room or using towards, recouping some of the possessions that they lost as well. Once we've been deemed that everyone's been taken care of at the scene, we would step away. If it happens during the day or if it happens overnight, we would follow up almost immediately the next day with the Office of Housing Stability, providing a list of the residents that were impacted with information that we deemed relevant. If it's Boston Public School children that have been impacted, our office is responsible for reaching out to the Boston Public Schools, notifying their headmaster, just so the school can be aware of what's happened to the child and make resources available if they seem fit, or accommodations if necessary. If they're elderly, a senior citizen, this is particularly devastating for senior citizens as well, as it can't always necessarily bounce back as other residents. We would coordinate with H-Tron and provide them with that information as well. And then, as I mentioned, we would make sure we get this information over to the Housing Stability with context saying, hey, we were able to identify, these folks are going to go back and move in with their family temporarily, or they've connected with their landlord and they're going to be taken care of. For Boston Housing Authority, occasionally we have fires with them as well. BHA is very great about stepping up and making sure that they can have some swing space or other units that they can move those residents to pretty promptly. So after that handoff with the Office of Housing Stability, sometimes residents will follow back up with us, maybe express concerns about, hey, we're having some issues with, getting something to eat for our family. That's when we would step in and connect them with food justice and also other partners as well. If there's additional resources necessary, we might connect again with the Office of Housing Stability and say, this individual is looking for more help or assistance with kind of finding a more long-term option for finding or landing in some housing. So we just kind of continually work with those residents if need be.
Great, thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could, just one point of information. I just want to just drop in and just recognize our colleagues here from the Red Cross. The Commissioner mentioned them. They're just a huge partner in how we deliver services, and didn't want to miss the opportunity to recognize them, and then also just join my colleagues in just identifying that fire is the one that is most pervasive in terms of what we see and often gets the attention. But there are a host of other disasters that we respond to that impact our residents just as impactfully, i.e., whether it be water main breaks or whether it's heat. Right, we had a scenario last winter, particularly over in Austin, Brighton. We were dealing with some concerns around heat. So I just want to just join my colleagues in highlighting that space that we prepare plans to respond to disasters, but want to make sure that we amply recognize them. Thank you, ma'am.
I do want to mention as well, we have many liaisons who are multilingual, but in the event that we are at the scene of a fire and we can't necessarily connect with a resident from a language bracket that we're unfamiliar with, we either tap in one of our cultural liaisons. They cover Haitian Creole, Vietnamese community, Cape Verdean community, as well as the Spanish-speaking community and Chinese community. And if none of those are available, then we also have a language access line that we can also utilize to make sure that we're conveying information back and forth with those residents.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Newman, and thank you, Chief, for that addition. Yes, we're looking forward to hearing from the Red Cross on the second panel, and we really appreciate their work and partnership in these areas. I'll go now to Danielle Johnson, our Deputy Director from the Mayor's Office of Housing. And just wait a second. Yeah, oh, there you go.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the rest of the counselors and my co-panelists for this important hearing. The Mayor's Office of Housing Stability works not only with my co-panelists to provide emergency response to constituents, but also our community partner, Neighborhood of Affordable Housing, also known as NOAA, who plays an influential role in ensuring constituents are safely housed while their units are repaired or until they can find affordable housing. To date, OHS has responded to more than 75 fires that have resulted in displacements. While these fires have been throughout Boston, we've seen an influx in Mattapan, Dorchester, East Boston, with a big showing in Austin, Brighton as well. With the help of 311, ONS, and NOAA, our office is able to triage cases and work with constituents whose units are no longer habitable. Given the numerous divisions that are involved, our office recently implemented an on-call system to better respond to fires. This response allows us to work proactively with other city divisions and NOAA. Further, in some instances where fires happen on BHA properties or larger management property sites, we've been able to coordinate to ensure placement in alternative units on those sites. Our office also works with constituents on the legal side of things, reminding them of the landlord's duty to provide and/or return their security deposit in the event the unit is no longer habitable, and/or instances where the landlord has homeowners insurance, making sure that tenants are aware of insurance claims and know the proper routes to file an insurance claim. While the search for alternative housing doesn't happen overnight, OHS and NOAA work collaboratively to assist displaced tenants find alternative housing. Once a tenant has successfully secured housing, in the event of a complete loss, in many cases our office provides moving cost assistance, so that's first, last security for families that have been impacted. And moving forward, we also provide stabilization services to ensure that they have all of the proper resources that they need, including proper food access, and are able to maintain their stable, affordable housing. I'm really appreciative of the work that my co-panelists do. It's definitely been a challenge, and there definitely are some gaps, but I'm hoping through this conversation we're able to fill some of those gaps. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Now, next up, we're going to Eliza Wasserman, our Director of the Office of Food Justice.
Good morning, counselors. My name is Eliza Wasserman. As mentioned, I'm the Director of the Office of Food Justice. I thank you for bringing us together to give this important issue the attention that it deserves. The mission of the Mayor's Office of Food Justice is to build a food system that is equitable, resilient, sustainable, and just. As part of our work, our office responds to calls Monday through Friday to 617-635-3717 and emails to food@boston.gov. In addition to these direct constituent inquiries, which often involve emergent food needs, we receive internal requests for support from Office of Neighborhood Services and council offices at times as well. So as was mentioned, when there's a fire, the Red Cross Disaster Response does provide vouchers, depending on the number of household members, when they respond to the scene, and those funds can be used for food amongst the many other needs that disaster victims, particularly fire or other disaster victims, have. OFJ has the capacity to provide limited additional support with gift cards of $50 or $100 to support food needs from external funds provided for emergency response to the pandemic. And displacement due to fire, flood, or other emergent issue is one of the scenarios in which we are able to provide gift cards either for groceries or a Visa gift card that can be used at local restaurants for prepared food or online ordering in the case, many of the cases where residents do not have access to any kitchen or cooking equipment or even a microwave in many cases. So for calls that we receive directly, our staff take and respond to each call and keep a log. And of the calls we received between July and March 28th, one was for someone whose belongings were lost in a fire and needed food. We provided gift cards and coordinated with BHA and DTA on this call around SNAP enrollment support. We were pulled into several response efforts for households displaced by fire in the past year through ONS and council offices, and between November, January, and February. So they were both residents displaced by fires and a water main break. In each case, we coordinated with ONS and NOAA to provide additional support for food through gift cards, either e-gift cards delivered electronically or through the ONS liaisons directly. In one case, the fire in Roslindale, there was with a larger number of families in one building. We partnered with the Neighborhood Food Action Collaborative based in Roslindale to provide further food support to several households displaced by the fire. We are in contact with the Red Cross and community partners and are interested in collaborating to identify the best ways to provide support around food needs in a coordinated way. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to you all. We'll go now to counselors for questions. I'll leave mine to last. We'll start with Counselor Louis-Jen, and then Counselor Braden and Counselor Flaherty, the original co-sponsors, then Counselor Coletta and Counselor Flynn. Counselor Louis-Jen.
Thank you, and thank you to the chair. Thank you again to administration for all the information that you provided, and of course the Red Cross and NOAA also for being here. I, was remiss to state that we invited and reached out to families themselves who were victims of fire, but a lot of them, it's difficult for them to sort of relive that experience and to share. So I do want to just note for the record that we were, in this discussion, are centering those who are affected by fire, the 5 fire victims, and we are here to help uplift their needs and their voice here. So wanted to make sure that was on the record. Oftentimes, the biggest problems that folks face they're pecuniary, right? It's like financial assistance, and there are barriers, government regulations that make it very difficult for the city of Boston to be able to help people directly with direct cash assistance, although there are models that I hope we can learn from. I guess my first question is to Director Johnson. The city of Boston has a Boston Emergency Assistance Fund. Can you talk a bit more about that and how this fits into, what that is, how that fits into this puzzle?
Thank you. Sure, happy to address your question, Councilor Louisan. So our Boston Emergency Assistance Fund provides assistance for survivors of fires that happen in the city. Usually, as we've heard today, there's a chain where we are able to get the names of the families that are displaced. It does require the families to work with our office and also work with NOAA, who does a lot of our placement services. And the funds are for first, last, and security. So it does take some time to find housing. So it may be that families are in a hotel while they are looking for housing, and NOAA's been very influential in helping us find affordable housing fairly quickly for these families. So part of the assistance program includes a hotel program, but we also recognize that our hotel funding is very limited, and the goal is to eventually move families into something more permanent and affordable and more useful for their living situation. So that is essentially what the assistance is. It's part hotel program, part moving cost assistance after affordable housing has been found. And we also make sure that the housing that is being sought is affordable and is sustainable. So we're not just trying to get people out of hotels just to get them out of our system. It's, we really need to work with the families to understand what their financial makeup is, what they're actually able to afford, what financial commitments they have that would preclude them from affording certain rents or living in certain locations. So that's part of the process as well.
Thank you. Can you tell us, is there an allocated amount yearly for the Boston Emergency Assistance Fund? How much?
Sure, I'll have to get that information because I don't know it off the top of my head,
Yes.
but it depends, what the need is depends on the family size.
Depends on
the family size. So if it's a larger family, their need may be more because they're moving into a larger unit as opposed to a family of 2 who might not need as much space.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to understand if there's an allocated amount in
Right.
the city budget.
There is. I just don't know the number
Okay.
off the top of my head. I can get that
Through the chair, if
information.
we could get that information,
Definitely.
that would be helpful. And so we have this Boston Emergency Assistance Fund that really is administered through NOAA. When it comes to hotel stays, is there a maximum number of days that for a family, or is it just as long as needed?
It's usually as long as needed. It's usually we try to aim for 7 days, but obviously the search for affordable housing takes much longer than 7 days. So we've had families that are only there for 7 days. We've had families that are there for a month's time. So I think it also depends on whether families have vouchers. It's a little bit easier to move if you have a voucher either through Boston Housing Authority or through Metro Housing. You're able to move with the voucher. So those types of cases, which we see a little more often than not, we are able to transition families into more permanent housing. But the base is 7 days, but it's mostly as needed if families aren't able to find something affordable within that 7-day time frame.
Okay, and do you know how many times you've used the Boston Emergency Assistance Fund just in the last year?
Again, I don't want to guess
Yeah.
and not say with certainty, so I can get that information for you as well.
Okay. And have there ever been any scenarios where you've had private companies or businesses in Boston that have contributed to the fund or have expressed an interest in contributing to the fund?
We have not, unless constituents have a GoFundMe that they raise the money on their own.
Okay. Switching a little bit to affordable housing and affordable housing priority. So victims of fires can get I believe it's a preference with Boston Housing Authority. How long, after receiving that preference, how long does it take for placement?
Another good question, and that may be better suited for BHA, I think, because BHA properties are limited. It may take it varies, so I can't speak for BHA in terms of how long it would take to place a family who has a fire emergency priority.
Okay. You know, this was, again, the family that when I was an attorney working, am an attorney, but when I was working on this issue, that we found that to be incredibly helpful in the partnership that we had with the Boston Housing Authority to ensure this family was in a hotel for much longer than 30 days. They were there for quite a period of time, but were able to be sort of expedited in the housing process, getting a voucher. Curious what interactions we have when it comes to placement in hotels with state level assistance.
Sure. So if it is a family, we try to, and they're eligible, we try to place families in the EA, Emergency Assistance Shelter Program, which provides assistance usually in a scattered site format, which is a fancy word for an apartment. So we try to transition families into that. We've had very good communication with our state partners in transitioning families to shelter, understanding that it's not ideal, but also having those conversations with constituents to let them know that this is probably the quickest route to finding something more affordable as to a hotel that maybe only has a kitchenette versus a scattered site, which has more of a robust housing situation. So we coordinate once we know what the family makeup is and once we know what the financial information is of the families. We're able to have a conversation with the state. Placement for that can vary because the state is busy with a number of issues related to shelter. So, but luckily we have, like I mentioned, good communication. And I did want to note on the BHA piece that we also have good connections with BHA. So we're able to quickly strategize with them as well in terms of how long they think a family could go into one of their units. So we also have good communication. That's taken time to build. So in the event that there is a fire and that we know that it's a priority or someone with a BHA voucher, we're able to coordinate with them fairly quickly.
Thank you. Can you explain why it's faster, the route to finding permanent housing is faster if a family lands in emergency in an EA shelter?
Sure. I think one of the reasons is because the state has a more broad shelter program. So we're operating out of 2 or 3 hotels that we use versus the state has sites all over the state. So they're able to maneuver families in and out to different shelter programs. So usually we found with some fire survivors, they're able to transition into shelter within a few weeks as opposed to waiting for affordable housing, which could take months or numerous months, as you explained with your client.
Okay. I have more questions for you, but I'll wait till for round. Is my time
Yeah,
up?
your time, yeah.
Okay. But I'm sorry, I have questions for others as well. But
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Louis-Jean. Councillor Braden.
Madam Chair, Councillor Louis-Jean has asked many of my questions already, but I'm just curious about landlords' insurance. I know that there's some requirement that the landlords offer some assistance as well if they have adequate insurance. Is that correct? Like, is there a certain sum that landlords are supposed to give to their displaced tenants if they're displaced by a fire?
Sure. So landlords are required to have homeowners insurance, and tenants can choose whether or not they have renters insurance. Depending on the homeowner insurance policy, it may require that landlords provide some sort of recourse to tenants that are displaced. Outside of that, oftentimes our instruction to tenants are have a conversation with your landlord. Sometimes the policy may not require, or it may not be that landlords are aware that they have a duty to provide some sort of assistance to displaced tenants. And part of what our office does is have those conversations, because we understand that can be a difficult dynamic of going to your landlord, asking that they provide some sort of assistance, given that you're displaced. And a lot of the fires that have happened are smaller landlords who don't have the financial capital to place a tenant for months on end into a hotel. So that's where our office steps in and provides that assistance. But I do think it's a larger conversation regarding what duty landlords have to their tenants who are displaced. And, you know, tenants do have some recourse in housing court. They can definitely file a complaint with the landlord alleging that they have not provided proper services to them, given that they are paying use and occupancy. So there's also that recourse, but this is an emergency situation, so there's really no time to do that until later down the road, once a tenant is at least secured temporarily.
And I'm just wondering, does tenants insurance, those that have it, does it cover the displacement by an emergency, like a fire? Does it, usually they insure for theft of their valuables more than displacement of a fire. I know we had a very sad situation in our district was a year and a half, about a year and a half ago, where somebody actually, it was the day after move-in day, and there was a fire. Somebody sadly died in it, but you know the tenants hadn't even organised themselves to get tenants insurance in that situation. So that's always a challenge. I'm also curious about the flooding issue. In the event of a flood, if the Red Cross isn't mandated to help in that situation, and it can be equally devastating in many ways. I know fire is such an it all happens so fast, but the flooding situation can be equally devastating. What sort of supports do we have in the event of an apartment being flooded by a burst water main or whatever? Is it the same? What other agencies can help in that situation if the Red Cross isn't available?
Sure, thank you for the question. I think it highlights the challenge that I attempted to articulate earlier with regards to the different types of disasters that we have that become our reality for all of us that sit up before you, right? The reality is in the moment. And as a city, one that endeavors to treat everyone in a dignified way, we don't leave anyone without services. Council, I point to the experience that we had approximately 2.5 to 3 years ago over on Cambridge Street, on your district, where we had a 1-inch water line that went down from a amateur plumber. Subsequently took out every unit below. We had to stand up the shelter system over at the Jackson Man School to be able to support those families, and then the logical pathway for pass off to additional city services continued. So as a matter of fact, for all of those residents and constituents in the city that experience that type of loss or that type of experience, we as a city would support. But it does highlight those gray areas in the response from some of our traditional partners and how we do have to have a broader conversation to think about that space. But the short answer is that the city will continue to support, and that's what we've always done.
Thank you. The other question I had was with regard to, we've had sadly a few fires in BHA properties, and it's not just the one unit that maybe is the seat of the fire, but all the other units that are displaced by smoke damage, and very often they're elders or folks with a disability, and they are displaced from their community. They're the folks that live in the building, their neighbours, and it seems, is there any way to any system of expediting the repairs so that those folks can be getting back into their own units again after a fire? And sometimes it can take years, and it's incredibly distressing. I get calls from the neighbours of the people who are displaced saying, when can he come back? It's that sort of scenario that they're desperate to just get everybody back in the same space again and support them with their community that they've been living with.
I can try to jump
I think
in
you're
on
probably familiar with this one,
Yeah, I've certainly responded to a few of those. BHA would have more information. I think it's on a case-to-case basis. I know, for instance, the Patricia White fire that occurred that took a lengthy set of time because I think it was multiple apartments that were devastated by the fire. I know BHA does try to work with the tenants and try to prioritize placing them back in that particular development. I know, like, for instance, in Fidelis, there was an elderly gentleman that was displaced. We worked with BHA. They were able to place him back, different building, but still within the Fidelis complex. And then other times I know, coordinating with the local BHA manager for on scene, just making sure, like, waiting to find out when a resident's getting out of the hospital, and then coordinating with Red Cross to make sure we're able to connect with that family. So I do know that BHA does try to prioritize putting people back in the development that they were living in prior.
And the other question is more of a sort of a practical question in the event of an emergency, and you folks, Connor, you might be able to answer us. Sometimes it's very difficult to get a hold of the owner of the property, the property manager in the emergency. They're nowhere to be found. You can't contact them. Like, is that a common occurrence, or and how do we handle that?
It's a great question. I mean, I can only speak anecdotally to the fires that I've responded to. Most of the time, the landlord does get out there, or at least if it's a larger building, the property manager might have someone that represents them, or for instance, like a handyman or whatnot. If we're unable to get in contact someone, we do have the means of tapping into Inspectional Services Department, which has detailed information on most of these property owners because they need to register those units. And then often tenants also as well have cell phone numbers at least, or some type of contact information from interacting with their landlord as well. So we can rely on those and make sure we usually include that information as well when we send that over to Housing Stability.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. And I want to note we were joined a while back by Councillor Julia Mejia at large as well. Councillor Flaherty, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, and thank you to my co-sponsors, obviously to the Commissioner, to the Chief, to the two directors and the Deputy Director, and for the great work that you guys do. And I'd be remiss if I did mention the work that both Kate Bennett and Sheila Dillon have done in this space. I know that each of us, myself personally, have called many times over the years in an effort to try to find some housing for someone that has been displaced due to a fire or another traumatic event. And also, I know I can speak for Councillor Flynn and I, we've had a number in our own neighborhoods where we've had to lean on our hotel partners to do the right thing, being a good corporate citizen, given that we're a host community to a lot of hotels, as well as some of our larger landlords, and give credit to those that had some available units and we were able to put folks in homes. So a lot of the stuff I think we're concerned about, at least I know I am, and why I had joined Councillor Louisiane and Councillor Braden and my colleagues in putting this forth. It's really like it's the weeks and months after the fire department leaves and after the ribbons, the tape is cut, whether it's a crime scene or a fire scene, the board ups, and the construction is sort of underway. You still have someone that is not housed and lost everything, lost all their personal and familial belongings, and are completely devastated and are trying to sort of piece things back together. And they may or may not have had renter's insurance. They may or may not have had homeowner's insurance, and or may have gotten a claim denied. And they seem to be sort of left out with really no recourse. And as everyone else moves forward, fire trucks go back to the fire station, chief and your team and all the different directors and deputy directors we have, you go into your respective lanes and continue to deal with the next incident. There are people that, again, weeks, months, and in some instances years later that are still left in the ruins. And so how can we as a city, be a little bit more compassionate, but have a system where we're working with folks, whether they're landlords or tenants, after a traumatic event, and we're helping people piece together. Red Cross, I know we've got representatives in there, they do great work. And when you listen to whenever you listen to the scanner, or if you've had a fire in your neighborhood, as the fire is ongoing and as multiple alarms are continuing to go, Red Cross is sort of right there with water and coffee and blankets and provisions early on. And I know I've had family members that have gone through a very similar experience. But for Red Cross, in the night it was happening, or as the event was going on, while our fire service, our firefighters are still in the act of putting the fire out or preventing its spread or saving life and property, It's the Red Cross that are there with accompanying hand to lend and some advice, and at least gets the ball rolling. And of course, the mayor's office, during my entire tenure here on the Boston City Council, all of our mayors and their Office of Neighborhood Services, they're out there at 3 in the morning right with this, or they're out there first thing in the morning, nights, holidays, and weekends. Again, just taking information, connecting them to the resources and service. So, Connor, that's obviously the job that you do and your respective team up at Office of Neighborhood Services, but more often than not, it'd be a district or at-large council getting a call sometimes in the middle of the night from a neighborhood services, or sometimes might be the reverse. It may be us reaching out, and it's that collaboration, it's that spirit of cooperation. And you think about our city and its successes, it's all a direct result of partnerships. So we've got some great partners here, and I think our goal here is to identify who are the partners sort of after the fact, that the weeks and the months after the incident that we can lean on to help restore people, families, to make sure they have a roof over their head and make sure that they have the resources that they need to kind of get themselves and their families back on track. Again, you can't replace a lot of those items, those personal items. They get lost in a fire, but the fact that the folks are still there, they're still alive. If they haven't lost a loved one in the fire, then they have a tremendous amount to be grateful for. But we also have a responsibility as the city to rally around them much further down the road than we currently do. So look forward to sort of getting some more information from folks that are here to find out ways that what is it that we as a city council can do, working in partnership with the administration to provide resources weeks and months down the road after an event, a catastrophic event where someone's house is either burned to the ground or they've been displaced, and no one seems to be sort of following up, or they may have run out of options because they didn't have insurance, et cetera. And what can we do to continue to keep moving them and their families forward? So thank you very much for the co-sponsors and my colleagues and for all of the work that you guys do on behalf of our city. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty. Next up is Councillor Coletta.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank my colleagues for their questions. The Emergency Assistance Fund was something I was going to ask about, and thank you, Danielle, for talking about that. I was also going to discuss insurance policies with tenants and landlords. I do have to frame my comments and my questions just through one fire that took place in East Boston on Princeton Street. It was 3 separate units last summer. There was about 28 folks who were displaced. And just based on the folks who we were talking with, these individuals lived with their whole families in individual rooms to be able to afford rent. And East Boston is, as we all know, the rent is increasing. And so these families are just one emergency away from really being let out to dry and not having any support systems. And so what we find with OHS, and Danielle, I know you do incredible work, what we find is that these families, it takes 3 months to find something that they can afford in East Boston and go back to the community that they call home. And so I know that you're doing what you can with NOAA, and I want to give them a shout out for what they do. But with the Princeton Street fire, we had one individual who initially refused Red Cross support. So this was the first $500. And he was going to stay with family. And he ended up staying with that family for 3 months, and he basically overstayed his welcome. And so when we tried to get him some sort of support, I was calling realtors myself, like, can we try to get him something that is below market, whatever. And it was a difficult process. And he was really, really going through it. And I just want to call out his story in this space. What eventually got him something was a referral to the city voucher program. But that wasn't until after there was a push from our office, and I believe ONS too, to get him a referral through OHS. And so I'm wondering what triggers a referral to the city voucher program, and if everybody is already automatically put into that, or it really takes somebody following up to make sure that it happens.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Coletta, and thank you for your advocacy. So the city voucher program is usually designated for constituents who normally wouldn't be eligible for emergency assistance through the state program. So you aren't automatically added to the list. And the way that the referral can happen is through the avenues that you took, but also community partners such as NOAA or any other community partner that has a constituent who they think could benefit from this service. It is a very long list, and we do have limited vouchers. So I say that with caution because I don't want to give the assumption that this is something that will happen automatically, because there is a vetting process that happens that's usually based on who has the most need, which is an unfortunate scenario that we have to be placed in, where we have families who are, as you mentioned earlier, are undocumented, and because of that aren't eligible for EA. So having to make those decisions of, do we place this family of 4 who's undocumented on our list of city vouchers, or a single individual who's undocumented without any family supports. So those are the types of inquiries that we have to make when, not to say that that person isn't going to be on the list, but making sure that we have conversations such as this as to why this person has not been provided a voucher, why this family has, which are difficult conversations that folks in my office have to make on a frequent basis. But it's also having conversations with BHA and strengthening and bolstering our partnership with them, because a lot of our city voucher program is provided through BHA. So figuring out the gaps in that and also using anecdotal experience of, we've seen these types of families or individuals coming to our office who need assistance. We need to ramp up the amount of vouchers that are provided. So I think it's a combination of having conversations, more conversations with BHA, but to your question in terms of a referral, it's calling our office, and I want to make sure that your constituents and other counselors' constituents feel empowered to reach out to our office if there are tenants that are in need of this type of service. So the referrals, we have walk-ins, we have a phone line, we have an email, so any form of communication, and we have multilingual staff, so we welcome the referrals however they come.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned earlier that you are in constant communication with tenants to inform them of their rights, especially those who are undocumented and need assistance in navigating this system that is bureaucracy. Is there a one-pager or a card that we provide to tenants in multiple languages, just letting them know, hey, call our office, this is what we can do to help you, these are your rights? Yep. Is there something like that exists?
Yes, we have a lot of literature that provides, we have top 10 things tenants should know, top 10 responsibilities of landlords, and we have a one-pager card that provides in different languages that provides the services that OHS provides. So happy to provide your office and the rest of the counselors with that information.
Thank you. And it's in multiple languages?
Correct.
Okay.
Spanish, Haitian Creole, Chinese, Cape Verdean Creole. So yes,
Awesome.
Multiple languages.
And you also discussed that you were in conversation with landlords too, and landlords, from what I heard, let me know if this is wrong, it depends on their individual policy if they are required to produce funds or resources to put families up and give them shelter. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It depends on the policy. I would have to have conversations with a lot of landlords, unfortunately, don't know about their own policies and what those cover. So I think that's a bigger conversation in working with our home center of having them provide information to homeowners of what homeowner insurance looks like, what happens in the event of a fire and you have tenants. That's a little outside of my purview, but there are policies that speak to what the landlord's responsibility is for tenants who are displaced.
And what happens when there's a landlord who is unresponsive? Who is responsible? Who is holding the landlord accountable in this instance? Like, who is calling them up and letting them know you have to provide these funds? Or does a tenant then have to go to housing court, which we all know is expensive and very burdensome process?
I don't know if any of my co-panelists want to.
Is anybody from the city calling the landlord and just following up?
So, go ahead. Colin.
No, I believe we are with Office of Housing Stability. I know we coordinate with you. I know we coordinate with Chief Dillon as well. And we mentioned that, maybe a certain partner is not cooperating or, is not being forthcoming. We have that conversation through tenants and then flag that for the Office of Housing Stability as well.
Thank you. That's going to be a good segue into my next set of questions, which has to do with building collapses. But I know that we're talking about fires right now, but I'll cede my time. Chair, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Coletta. President Flynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the panel for being here, for the important work you're doing. I know Councilor Coletta and Councilor Flaherty referenced it, but the role of the district councilor in this process is critical. I respond to fires, I respond to water main breaks, other related issues, but it's important that one of the first calls that are made from ONS is to the district councilor. So I want to stress that. Again, I've stressed it several times. Sometimes I receive a call and sometimes I don't. But it's critical when something happens in my district that I'm notified immediately. So can we make sure that happens?
Sure, I'm happy to discuss with liaisons. And councilors, I want to thank you because I know many of you are at these fires. Councilor Coletta, Natalia mentions that you're at most, if not every single fire in East Boston, and working together and kind of making sure that tenants are being advocated for. And Councilor Braden, when you referenced, that tragic night where that young man lost his life in Brighton, I remember I wasn't even covering Brighton that night, but we were communicating via phone, just kind of discussing what was going on scene. So absolutely, I think working with the council is imperative for ONS.
Okay, so here's my question. When something happens, I want ONS to notify district councilors immediately. Can that be part of the process?
I'm happy to speak to my leadership team on that. Like I said, I know we have a lot of collaboration existing, but happy to touch base with them.
Who makes that decision?
So, Deputy Director, I need to communicate with our chief.
Can you get me an answer today? I need to make sure district councilors are notified immediately. I want to make sure you have a list of the district councilors, their cell phone numbers, and that they're notified immediately. Could you have the appropriate person give me a call this afternoon?
Certainly, Councilor.
And I want to make that a priority. I want to make sure that happens. I want to make sure every district councilor knows what's happening in their district. They know immediately when an issue is happening in their district. That's a priority for me. I know it's a priority for my district councilors and the at-large councilors as well. Our at-large councilors support us. So that's very important to me. That's a priority for me. So that's going to happen.
Yes, I can make sure you get a phone call.
Okay. Let me start by acknowledging the important work of the Boston Police, the Boston Fire, and EMS as well, the water and sewer emergency responders. Thank you, Chief, also. I've had some issues, also water main breaks in the Boston Water and Sewer Commission, and especially in the South End area. It impacts quality of life issues, it impacts public safety. But when that happens with the water and sewer main break, talk to me about the communication process to residents.
So I can jump in, sir. I apologize that Water and Sewer is not here to speak specifically for their internal operations and how they do communicate. I do know that from some recent conversations with regards to some of the dialogue that we were having, we do know that they have some level of communication through the 311 system, but with regards to the specifics around what their protocol is and the details of it, I would defer to Water and Sewer.
Okay. And again, not to keep focusing on the issue, that's why it's important to make sure that district councilors are engaged in this process at the very beginning. I can't stress that enough, and I'm somewhat, to be honest with you, frustrated about it. Let me ask, I represent the largest number of residents living in public housing developments. When there is a fire, when there is a water and sewer issue, when there is some other type of major emergency, what is different in terms of the response from city officials in BHA developments and outside of BHA developments? I don't think there should be anything different, but if there is something different, I'd like to know about it. And as it relates to undocumented residents, they should be given the same option as every other resident in terms of housing options. Not sure why they are treated differently and not getting the same access to housing. Maybe there is some type of policy that I just don't know about, but I'm not happy to hear that. But let me ask my question. What is different in terms of what services we provide residents outside of BHA and services we may not provide to residents inside BHA?
So I'm happy to respond to that. So there's no differences with service. It's just how we communicate. So when 311 gets a call and it's designated as BHA, they would notify the on-call person from BHA, as well as emails that would go out to the leadership of the BHA team. And then the liaison would then also communicate with the BHA manager when they arrived at the scene of the fire. The only difference, though, is that BHA would then assume responsibility with immediately providing housing that evening, as well as in general for where those displaced would be impacted. And regarding the citizenship of residents, we don't inquire whether or not they're citizens when dealing with them. We take down their contact information and we hand them over to Housing Stability, regardless of what their status is.
Oh, I thought I heard something that if someone was undocumented, they wouldn't get, did I hear that correctly? They wouldn't get a voucher? Is that something I heard correctly?
So I was referring to the state shelter program. So under the state shelter program, their eligibility requirements preclude currently undocumented residents from seeking emergency assistance shelter, which is where we implemented the city voucher program, which allows families or individuals who aren't eligible for EA would be eligible for a voucher through the city.
And Council, I would just add on the back of that, in the moment, particularly during the initial response, that there is no differentiation, right? It's a human being that's in need of services. So in the moment when we're responding, there is no differentiation. Certainly from our standpoint, under the first responder category, we don't ask those questions. We deliver services, particularly because it's an exigency that's happening in that moment. And with regards to BHA, I'll just point you to two examples of that coordination of services that did happen on your district, sir, last year. There was an unfortunate exchange of gunfire over in the area of the McCormick housing development, and one of the transformers was struck, and it ultimately resulted in loss of power over there. And again, that was another example of city services that responded and worked in coordination with BHA to mobilize services to support that community. And the other example I would point to, sir, is the most recent cold snap that we had about a month ago. There were meters that froze up over at West Broadway Street. Again, ONS as well as other city departments were mobilized to support BHA in that response. So those are just two isolated examples of that coordination tree across city departments to ensure that we're supporting residents regardless of what community they're from.
For BHA residents, as it relates to an emergency with no heat, who physically puts the heat on in each apartment? Is it through a main structure? Not every unit controls their own heat. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so I would undeniably defer to BHA to respond in that space, sir.
Okay, because that's an important question, because if heat is out in one apartment, usually heat is out in all of the apartments.
Yeah, and certainly I responded on scene with regards to the cold snap that happened about a month ago, and I can tell you that each individual resident was treated with the dignity of city services and not and assuming that they didn't have heat. While BHA figured out the logistics of their actual system, we provided services across the neighborhood for all residents that did not have heat for that period.
Smoke detectors in BHA units, do we have them in there, and do we test them in there every day?
Again, I certainly would defer to the fire service for any specific questions on life safety, but as it relates to smoke detectors in the units, again, I would defer to BHA to respond to that in detail, sir.
Okay.
Councillor Flynn, if you have one more, but just.
My final point is not necessarily a question. It's I've heard from first responders. It's somewhat related or unrelated to this discussion at hand. I've heard from a lot of first responders on the closing of Dartmouth Street near the Copley Library. I've heard from the Boston Police Department, the EMS, the Boston Fire, but closing many streets in and around this area, especially Dartmouth Street, has a negative impact on first responders, vehicles getting in and out of that critical area. Closing off streets has a major impact on the time it takes for a responding vehicle to get somewhere. Every second is critical. Again, I know this is somewhat unrelated, but as we're talking about public safety and emergency response, I just want to go on record that closing off Dartmouth Street, which plays a critical role in the city, BPD and D4, the EMS headquarters, the Boston Fire Engine 7, Ladder 17 out of the Bay Village, the South End Engine 22, all located in and around the Back Bay area, but using Dartmouth Street, Berkeley Street. So every second is critical. So just want to state for the record that I'm against closing off Dartmouth Street because it'll have a negative impact on public safety in our city. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council President Flynn. Councilor Mejia.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the sponsors. I just have a few questions, and thank you for your hard work. As an at-large city councilor, we get people from all across the city, oftentimes reaching out. There have been times when people have called my house, well, my cell phone, at 2 o'clock in the morning. One in particular was the fire on Quincy Street that happened in Dorchester in February of, I think it was February 26th. There was a tenant who, a few days after being placed, had already run out of the funding that was allocated because it cost like $200 or something for a hotel. And I think the earmark for those, can you confirm? I think it was like $500 for a hotel. The Red Cross voucher that was provided, Red Cross comes out and gives a gift card. Okay, and it's so it was usually in the amount of 500. Okay, so can you just, this is one of the situations where, folks are put up, but then they end up exhausting their resources. And so people are in, crisis mode and, receiving, I pick up my phone because you just never know what's going on for people, right? But, I'm not going to call then, I'm not going to call someone else to wake them up because I'm like, okay, let's just hang tight. Let me see what we can do to kind of triage it. But there has to be some sort of system in place. And I'm curious if there is a system in place, what system is that so that I am not, trying to tap into my network or whatever little resources I have to help accommodate people in crisis mode at the 12th hour. So can you tell me if there is like some very specific program or protocol or policy in place for after 12 a.m. calls?
Sure. So Boston 311 is 24/7, so they're a great resource. Typically, in the event of if it's a fire, Red Cross will be able to provide a gift card, which is kind of used just as a temporary fix, and then we take that information that we've gathered from residents and then pass it off to Housing Stability, which would then work on working with NOAA to kind of provide more longer-term stays in a hotel so they can work on finding additional housing to go beyond that. So, ideally, ONS gets calls from residents consistently all the time. It's good for them if they can reach out during work hours prior, if they know that they're reaching the limit of that card and they're still waiting to be connected with Housing Stability, to contact the liaison during work hours. If it's something that's truly an emergency, that's something that can go to Boston 311 and they can get a hold of us.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. And then I'm just curious, when Boston residents are searching for information in the event of a fire, the Know Your Rights in case of a fire page, you have to use 4 different keywords before you can actually get there. So I'm just curious if you guys have navigated the website recently just to, look at the ease of it. So according to my team, the Know Your Rights in case of a fire only comes up after 4 keyword searches.
So I'm just curious I just want to flag that as something to be mindful of. And I'm curious if you could just talk to us a little bit about, if you happen to know this, landlord insurance policies for multi-unit residential buildings must provide up to, I believe, $750 in reallocation benefits to tenants according to Mass Housing general law. However, in Boston, this is barely enough to cover 4 nights of lodging in a hotel. So can you talk to me kind of how, as the city, we're filling in that gap?
Sure. So as Connor had mentioned, after 311 or after Red Cross comes out, provides the gift card, the Office of Housing Stability, gets in contact with the landlord. Oftentimes, we've seen that the fires that are happening are smaller scale, and these are smaller landlords who don't have the financial capital to provide $750 to their tenants. So what usually happens is our office provides that hotel assistance with the help of NOAA. So in the scenario that you just provided, where a family calls after hours, usually the next day our office responds and are able to either extend the hotel that they're currently staying in or move them to one of our contracted hotels within the city. So in terms of the $750 requirement, you are correct. I'm glad you did your research there, but having that conversation with landlords who don't have, they've just lost their property as well, or at least a part of it. So connecting them with our home center so that they can get the proper financial recourse, so that then a tenant may be able to file a claim against their insurance company. But as I was mentioning to Councilor Braden, this is an emergency situation where many times tenants don't have the time to go to housing court, file something with the judge. So we're having to step in and provide that emergency response while trying to work with the landlord to see, even if it's $50 that they can put towards a hotel cost.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I just want to uplift your department. You guys always respond to all of our emails and all of our constituent needs, so I really do appreciate how hard you work, Dr. Johnson. We really do appreciate your partnership. So I just have 2 more questions. One is in regards to, there is data showing that where victims of a fire end up moving to. Do we know? Do they end up coming back to Boston? Do they end up being gentrified out of the space because they can't afford to live here? To Councilor Coletta's question earlier in regards to trying to stay within the community that you were originally in, is there a database to show where our residents are being displaced to as a result of fire? Do we have any way of keeping track of that information?
So we receive information from 311, and we do have a database where we keep families who have been displaced, and then we have a system where we're able to figure out where they're moving to, and oftentimes, to Councilor Coletta's point, they aren't able to move into their communities. So I don't know if OEM or ONS or even the fire has another system in place, but we do keep track of that information to figure out where fires are happening and where constituents are moving to.
That's good.
Yeah, we do not. It's good that Housing Stability would keep track of, a lot of times when I covered Austin Brighton as the liaison for a number of years, you're dealing with a lot kind of younger professionals that could potentially, like I was said, especially with the pandemic where work was more remote, they'd be maybe moving back to live with their parents out of state, et cetera. But because of their resources, they typically wouldn't check back in with our office. They would kind of specify, I'm good, I don't need additional assistance, I have a place to go for the time being, and then where they would end up, we would not know.
Yeah. Before I get the gavel, I'm just going to have 2 more questions. One is very similar to another case that came across my office. Was a young mom of, I think, 5 children who lived in the South End. This was a water main break, and she needed some financial assistance because they put her in a hotel, but she didn't have a kitchen, and she also had a son who was autistic, so it was a really cramped space. I didn't hear that before. Councilman, he always gets it. That's okay. So I'm just curious about, and I'm going to ask my question. I'm curious about just the supports that families receive who can't afford to live off of gift cards, because that's what she ended up getting, gift cards to be able to feed her children. But we had to intervene and help support, tapping into our networks to find other ways for her to be able to stay somewhere else. So I'm just curious, kind of like accommodating people who living in a hotel is not the best case scenario. And then the other question that I have in regards to trauma and support services, there are a lot of folks that we're just talking about the nuts and bolts, but there's the trauma support services in terms of long-term, after you've been a victim of fire. If you have to get your birth certificate, if you have to get all of your paperwork in order, is the relief fund able to help support people and pay for that? Because I know you have to pay to get your birth certificate. So I'm just curious if the relief fund also has dollars earmarked to help support that.
So we explicitly don't have dollars that are used to support that, but in circumstances, there may be opportunity to provide that type of support to the constituent. And in terms of the scenario that you mentioned, I think I recall that family of trying to find them a housing solution that accommodates their needs, whether that's a kitchen or something that is more like a scattered site. We try to work with surrounding hotels within the community to make sure that we are accommodating those needs. Oftentimes, depending on the time of year that these fires happen, that may not be as available, also considering that the locality of the hotels that we use may not be what that family needs, given their children may be in BPS, so having them stay in Randolph might not be conducive to their needs. So really working with the families to figure out the hotel space, and also working with NOAA, who you'll hear from later today, who also do great work in trying to figure out what family needs are and where we can place the families.
Thank you. Will there be a second round of questions, Councilor?
Yes, yeah, so actually, if you don't mind, Councilor Mejia, we have Cambridge on the line virtually, but they have to go at noon. So what I was going to do is actually just have the city of Cambridge say a quick word about their program, and then we'll take any council second round questions for the Boston panelists, but also for Cambridge. And then we will go to our panelists from the Red Cross and NOAA. So thank you everybody for your patience. It's great to have so many councilors here, but it does create timing challenges. So if we can, Ethan, bring up Cambridge, that would be fantastic. And while we're working on that, I'll just say the sort of question that I have for the panel, and folks can think about it and we'll come back to it, is just, I think there's been a number of allusions to the fact that our systems are somewhat more patchwork for water main break type problems than they are for fires. And that really has to do with the Red Cross as a partner in the fire instance. So I guess I'm just curious, have we had the conversation about how to, could we make the response to water main breaks more, and not just water main breaks, but pipe bursts, all these things that are not fires, right? Like a little more systematic. So it'd be great to hear what the conversation has been so far. And certainly my note on Boston Water and Sewer would just be that my experience, there was quite a major water main break with some significant impact on the edge between my district and Councillor Flynn's in Beacon Hill a couple of years back. And my experience is that because there's often a legal question about whose fault it was and a kind of back and forth between water and sewer and various contractors working, everyone isn't necessarily leaping to be the ones to provide financial assistance, because everybody's kind of saying, well, it's really the other guy. That seems to be a problem in terms of our ability to just provide humanitarian assistance. So, but I don't need responses on that yet, because I want to make sure we get Cambridge before we lose them. So looking to go to David Kale, who's the Assistant City Manager for Fiscal Affairs from the City of Cambridge, and Maura Penzak, I think, is also on the line. I don't know, Ethan, if we have David. Or can you go check what is it? Well, while we're waiting for Cambridge, if anybody has any thoughts on what I just said, I'd take them.
Sure, I can jump in on that. Thank you very much for the question. There is a broader conversation that is happening that has been started as of recently with regards to water and sewer, and really streamlining that process to ensure that not only does the response from water and sewer align with the city, but it aligns with our broader response structure. So we are having that conversation. It started a couple of weeks ago. Henry Vitale, as well as Irene McSweeney, which runs his operations division, were both in the conversation, as well as their community relations folks. So there was a spirit of commitment to work across departments to ensure that that response is aligned. So, Councilor, yes, we are having that conversation, and we expect to have some results from that we think will be ultimately result in broader and more confined city services for the experience that the constituent experiences.
Okay, well, that's great to hear, and I'm sure councilors will have lots more questions about that and also are eager to hear the second shoe drop on that front. Do we have Cambridge? Okay. Councilor Lujan, I know you had second round questions. Do you want to just start with the panel,
sure.
and then we'll break in as soon as we have Cambridge up here?
Okay, great. Thank you again. I'm learning a lot on this panel, and I'm thinking about, we should have, I was thinking about this obviously in terms of fires, but my office has also dealt with Boston Water and Sewer, that, and thinking we should have had them here because we've had a number of water main breaks, and sort of the responsibility is on the city, unfortunately, even when, there is that legal question of causation, and the fear around that, but Boston Water and Sewer should be centered in that conversation. I remember speaking with the Director of Community Relations, and I think this was specifically about a water main break in the back of the Hill, JP area, that displaced a lot of folks, and we were running out of money to house them, and we were trying to figure out where we can get some funding and some resources. So definitely eager to have this conversation. This title was fire and emergency relief, and I think that's large enough to include floods. So Commissioner, thank you for bringing that to our attention. Oh, Cambridge is here, and so we're going to turn to Cambridge. I do have some questions, but we'll turn to Cambridge. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Councilor Lujan. And I think I see David Kale, who's again the Assistant City Manager for Fiscal Affairs at the City of Cambridge, up on the screen. And we just want to thank you for beaming in across the Charles River. It's very much appreciated here in Boston. So, Mr. Kale, you have the floor.
Thank you. I also would like to introduce Mara Penzak, who's our housing liaison for the City of Cambridge, who is very integral in our Mayor's Disaster Relief Program in terms of doing the intake. So what I will do is maybe just give you a very quick overview of what we do and then answer any questions. So way back in 1997, the city developed a trust fund, which was approved by the City Council, that is called the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund. And what that vehicle does is allows the city to accept donations from individuals and businesses to support folks who, at the beginning, were victims of fire instances or other kind of calamities that basically forced them from their homes. And basically, we have a program where we're able to give up to $2,400, $600 per individual, up to a family of four, basically help folks transition to either temporary housing or to pay for incidental expenses based upon a fire or other kind of displacement incident. The Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund was also very invaluable to the City of Cambridge because it provided a vehicle to accept significant donations back in 2016 to support the individuals who were impacted in East Cambridge by the massive fire that occurred back then. And we basically had a tiered program to allow the allocation of funds from the donations that we received. And then with the pandemic and COVID-19, we're able to use the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund to accept donations from individuals and corporations within the city to basically provide assistance to individuals who were impacted by the COVID-19, and that included rental assistance and utility assistance and incidental assistance up to $4,000. And so, again, when we created the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund as a trust, we had a very straightforward approach, but it's evolved over the years, which requires amendments to the trust to accept the changes in the way we use the funds. Mara will take a few seconds to explain what we do when there is an incident that affects individuals, and just briefly say what she does and how we go through the process. Mara?
Good morning. Thank you. So, there's a lot of feedback, sorry. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, yes. Thank you, Maura.
A lot of what we do is very similar to what the Office of Housing Stability in Boston does, and also the Office of Neighborhood Services. So when a fire occurs, we get contacted, my office or the multi-service center, or both, get contacted by the fire department or the inspectional services department, and we go out with the family or the household and really try to do both, as what's been described all morning, both the emergency and the long-term services case management. In terms of the fund, as David said, it's $600 per household member, up to $2,400. A lot of times, folks do need to, not a lot of times actually, we try to minimize how often folks need to use it for the hotel. I think what's in comparison is it seems to me that Boston, NOAA houses folks in a hotel and it's funded that way. If somebody needs housing, we don't have that set up, so it's case by case. One of the things that we've been trying to do in terms of hotels is develop relationships with various hotels so that when a disaster occurs, we can get someone housed and stretch that money as far as we can. In addition, we also use Red Cross. Our experience with Red Cross is there is no set amount of money that a household receives. So that always makes it challenging. So we do try to stretch the money as far as we can. It's a very simple process in terms of the money itself. We just fill out a very simple form. It goes for signatures to the Assistant City Manager of Fiscal Affairs, David, as well as Human Services, and then the mayor. And the check is sent directly to the household member, the head of household, or if it's a roommate situation, each roommate, and they can use it for whatever they want. And understanding that because it is disaster relief, they don't have to declare it as income. So that's just a little bit of an aside.
I would also just clarify that the way the trust is designed, there are 3 trustees, the Assistant City Manager for Finance, the Assistant City Manager for Human Services, and the mayor. So we all 3 have to sign up on the application, and we do periodic reviews of our policies and procedures. But those are the trustees of the trust fund.
And we also, we do use it for any displacement. So whether it is because of a flood, a burst pipe, or a fire, residents are eligible for this.
Great, thank you so much, David and Maura. I'm gonna, because I know you guys have a hard stop at noon, I'm gonna just do rapid fire questions for counselors for Cambridge specifically. So I'd ask people not to use their full time, but just actual questions for Cambridge, and then we'll just finish up with questions for the Boston panel, and then go to our last panel. So Councilor Louis-Jen, any questions for Cambridge?
Thank you to Assistant City Manager Kale and Maura Penzak for being here. You know, in my office, we were looking into this issue and troubleshooting potential solutions. We saw the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund and thought that the flexibility of the fund it could be a real bonus. And we're looking at possibly doing something like that in the city of Boston. Some of the concerns about direct assistance or direct cash to our residents is the anti-aid amendment. So I'm wondering, when the check is cut to the residents, who is it from, or is it, how have you worked around that issue?
So we had those similar issues. And so because these are private donations and they are not city funds, basically that I think allows the anti-aid amendment to be somewhat resolved, but obviously the checks and balances about policies and procedures, about to whom we issue checks and under what criteria, and what the program may be depending upon the incident, if we receive an influx of significant funds, is all basically managed within the trust and becomes an amendment to the trust when we have such incidences. So I think that's how basically one of the advantages of the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund. It does accept private donations exclusively, and there are no city funds, and there is a policies and procedures that are part of the trust creation.
Thank you, Manager Kale. Is it completely corporate donations? Are there avenues for individuals to also contribute? I ask because, you know, for example, this fire in Mattapan, the Mattapan Teen Center held a bake sale, and folks were contributing. Oftentimes, folks are reaching out to me, and I'm trying to coordinate with the family to see if there could be donations. So, wondering if there's a community that's interested in helping, or neighbors interested in helping, are they able to give to the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund, and can they earmark it for a particular fire or emergency that has occurred?
A combination of answers. So basically on our webpage, there is a donate tab within our Pay Your Bills Online to donate to the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund. Clearly, when we had the East Cambridge fire, we had a significant amount of private donors from residents as well as corporate, and those funds were used exclusively when we collected the money. We basically had a knowledge of how much was collected, and we distribute those funds. We were fortunate during COVID-19 to have significant support, as well as residents, but significant support from our businesses in Cambridge. And Takeda donated $2 million, and Biogen did $1 million, and Terry and Suzanne Raygon did $500,000. And Amogen did $250,000, and we had folks from Boston Properties and community partners from MIT and Harvard and DIFCO West and Alexandria to basically make donations. So it's a combination of both, depending upon what the incident is. And again, those are our two biggest experiences in terms of collecting funds to make major support to support individuals who were harmed by the pandemic and by the East Cambridge fire. And then we have, as Mara said, very tragic for the individuals, but a lot more smaller instances that we're able to help individuals. So the donations are a combination of both, depending upon what the situation is.
Thank you. And then earmarking, can folks do that? Are they able to say donate specifically to this fire in East Boston, or this fire that occurred on Prince Street? Or
typically, they make the donation to the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund as a global donation, but clearly, when we had the East Cambridge fire, we collected the funds quickly and we distributed them quickly, so folks knew that their donation for that was generally for that purpose, and the same thing for COVID. But generally, it's for the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund, and there is no necessary earmarking, but as I said, based upon the timing and the collection, it's pretty clear about what the funds are going to be used for.
Okay, thank you, David, and thank you, Maura, for being here. I'm going to cede to my colleagues.
That'd be great. Thank you so much, Councillor Lujan. Councillor Braden, any quick questions for Cambridge?
Councillor Louis-Jean has asked my questions again.
Great, excellent. That's called teamwork. Councillor Coletta?
No questions for Cambridge. Thank you so much for being here.
Councillor Mejia, anything for Cambridge?
Yeah, I just have two questions. Thank you both for being here. I'm just curious about the paperwork and the process. If you could just kind of walk me through, is it millions of pages that people have to fill out to be able to access the funds? You know how that is. And I'm just curious if you could just talk to me about the turnaround time from the moment that you apply to the moment you're able to get those funds. What does that look like? And then lastly, when I think about direct support, I'm always curious about the way we, especially for poor people, it's like you get what you get and you don't get upset, and you're lucky if you get anything. So I'm just curious, what level of flexibility do folks who are applying for these funds are able to utilize those funds to maybe potentially buy clothes if they need to, pay for transportation costs, or is it very specifically earmarked towards, we're going to give you $600 and it's for X, Y, and Z? I just feel that that level of monitoring sometimes makes it difficult for people who are already struggling to be able to have a sense of agency for themselves. So I'm curious what that looks like on the end for the fund.
So maybe I'll start and Maura will finish because so with the larger incidences, clearly we're sensitive to the fact that, let's say for the East Cambridge fire, that we basically were able to understand who the folks were impacted by the fire. And we were able to very quickly get out gift cards, and we're able to have a round of direct funding because we have a very finite list of folks who were impacted by that fire. So no, the intake is usually done, and I think Maura can speak about this when I turn it over, about how that was handled in terms of we knew who the people were impacted. We knew that we had an urgency to get the funds out, and the finance department was able to get gift cards and to get information for checks fairly quickly. The same thing for the Mayor's Disaster Relief for COVID. Basically, we collected the funds and we very quickly did an online application. And I guess I'm happy to report that once that application went online, which was fairly short after we started collecting funds, we issued checks the same week that the application process opened up after verification of the information that was required. And then Maura, why don't you talk about the things I've missed in terms of process and timing for the more basic ones, yeah.
Sure. So in terms of the paperwork, it's actually incredibly simple. It's different than what the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund during COVID was. This is a one-page that we fill out when we meet with the family and again, or the household. And again, we do that by going out to the fire as much as we can, or calling them immediately thereafter. It is simply name, number of folks in the household and who they are, and where they want the check sent to. So, and it is, then we send it to, again, to the trustees, to David and the assistant manager for human services and the mayor, and it is cut within a couple of days or a week at the most. So it is really a very, very simple process form that we fill out for folks. They don't have to show us any, any documentation. And also, your last question was what can it be used for? Anything, really anything. They don't have to tell us. They don't have to give us receipts. It's simply just money for them to use as they wish.
And then they typically are folks who've been displaced, but also I just want to be very clear. We're on site, our multi-service center, Amara, so we actually know who the people who are impacted by the incident and the fire. So it's not as if it doesn't have a process, it does. So, and that what makes it easier is we work on site with the Red Cross or whatever. We know the people may be displaced. We know that they need incidentals. They may need some temporary accommodation. So, but I would say for all these programs, the individuals are clearly defined. So it's not haphazard. And that's what makes the process easy because we have the collaboration of our Human Services Department and Maura and her folks to basically make sure we identify the folks who are impacted.
That's great.
And the fire and ISC. But.
Yeah, that's great. Really happy to hear that. And just one last question. Let's say, for instance, you are undocumented. Is there a way, do you on the back end in terms of accounting and, keeping track of all your records, do you need to be able to have a list of all of the people that you've given to? Do they need to submit any taxes or anything like that? It's just like simple. You don't have to worry about any of those things on the back end. That's great. I see you shaking your head and I'm so happy to hear. No, because a lot of times people who are undocumented, are afraid to solicit support because they don't know in terms of taxes, if they received a gift or whatever, however you want to name it, that there needs to be some sort of disclosure. And so that's what prevents a lot of people who are living behind the shadows here feel a little bit intimidated and worried about applying for assistance if they are going to have to share information like that. So I'm happy to hear that there is none of that. That's great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. And thank you again to our colleagues at Cambridge. I think it's a great model to hear about. And I think, from my perspective, I feel like Bostonians are very generous, and that when people see, people displaced, there is this instinct to want to help. We've definitely seen that manifest as very generous responses to GoFundMe's and such. But I think the idea of what you guys do in terms of being able to centralize a destination for that private philanthropy and being efficient to get things out to people it seems like a great complement to the type of things that we do here in the city. So really appreciate you guys, and thank you for your patience with our timing. I'm going to let my colleagues ask any final questions for the administration panel, just asking everyone to be mindful of time because our Red Cross and NOAA partners have been very patient. So Councilor Louis-Jean, do you have any?
Yep, I have just a few, hopefully short questions. One is a bit open-ended, but the first question is, who collects in the city the number of people displaced by fire in any given year? Who has that data? Is that data that we collect?
Mara, why don't you handle that?
Oh, thank you, City Manager.
I think that was in Boston.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry. Thanks so much, Mr. City Manager. I think we're letting you guys go because we know you have a new.
Right.
So thank you for being with us. But that one was headed the Boston direction.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate your respectfulness for our next meeting we have to attend. So thank you so much, and please contact us if you have any further questions.
We will.
We definitely will, and we know our partners here in Boston will as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I did have more questions for Cambridge, but I was trying to, let them go. So the question about who collects information on the number of people displaced by fire, is that data that we collect? Is that data that we can collect by the OHS, fire department?
Yes, OHS collects that data.
Okay. Is that information that you're able to provide us via the chair?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And do we have it broken down by neighborhood?
I believe so. We can manipulate the data to show that, I believe.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is there any additional information that the fire department collects around the number of fires and people displaced? Commissioner?
We do collect. We have a VAU Form 1 that we collect all the information of all the people that were displaced, ages, names, address, and we do have that data, yes.
Commissioner, is that data that you think you could share with
I'll see if they can compile it all and get it to you, yes.
And how big is the VAU? Like the number of people who are staffing that department?
I'd say it probably rotates about 5 or 6 members. Depends on how many people are displaced. They usually send 2 members to each incident.
Okay.
At the request of the chief in charge.
Okay, thank you. Again, this question is for Director Johnson, I believe. So there's a $750 requirement that under Massachusetts general law that landlords have insurance to cover up to $750 for relocation fees. That's broad, essentially. It lists what a definition of things that included, but doesn't limit it to what we would, the standard things of relocation fees. In your experience, how many tenants do you see, actually, and there have been variations of this question asked, but taking advantage, let's say in your tenure here, in a year, I don't know if it's been a year, but if in a year, more than a year? Okay.
No, tomorrow will be a year.
Happy anniversary.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
You do incredible work, and so I'm so grateful for you, and so we are grateful to have you in the city. But have you seen tenants taking it percentage-wise? Is it 25%, 50%? Is it really low? What's the number? I'm trying to think about what all the resources that we have here for tenants.
I would say very low because a lot of the tenants are indigent and aren't able to go to court and actually start the process of holding a landlord accountable. And it's few and far between that tenants actually even know what Mass General Law chapter, I forget the chapter, what that requires. And it's us, trying to flex our city muscles to say, hey, work with us here. We understand that you're a smaller landlord and you might not have as much financial assistance provided, but seeing if there is some other avenue, whether that's returning the security deposit. So trying to work with landlords as well outside of the legal process. But to answer your question, it's a small amount, if any, tenants that utilize it.
And does the city always, and is that your office, do you always contact the landlord when a tenant comes to you?
We do,
Okay.
yes.
And then this is more of an open-ended question, I think, to everyone. Obviously, so, you know, there are many reasons why I put this before the city council, one being very early on in my tenure as city councilor, a family from East Boston, doesn't speak any English, came to my office with just my name written in need of help after being displaced by a fire. And this was before Councilor Coletta was on the council, so it's not a reflection on her, but and we did everything that we could to give them resources. Obviously, there's some sort of gap or failure in the system where someone is walking into City Hall with the name of a new at-large city councilor after just experiencing a fire in need of help. So if folks, you know, if you have ideas about where the gaps are and how we can do systems improvement.
Sure, I can start with that question. I think one gap is because there are so many divisions that are involved. It's hard for constituents who are impacted by this trauma to keep track of who, okay, ONS helped me, okay, a VAU provided me this type of assistance, okay, Red Cross came out. So I think that simplifying that process a little bit for constituents, and I know that ONS is working on fire cards that they actually give out proactively to the displaced, which has our contact information on it so that tenants know if you are displaced, this is the number that you call. And with us also working with NOAA, that can also be confusing as well. Of a constituent may say, I'm not working with the city, but they're working with NOAA. So being able to create a simplistic way of tenants understanding how the processes work. And one thing that we did within OHS, as I mentioned earlier, was created an emergency on-call system which responds to fires after hours, so after 5 p.m. and also during the weekend, so that we're able to triage a little bit better and communicate with constituents regarding the communication piece. So I'd say that would be one piece where it's a bit of a gap.
I would just add to it, Council, it's a great question, right? We always endeavor to try and identify those failure points and/or those gaps in the name of service. So I think that there are probably some innovative opportunities that we may be able to have across departments where we can sort of institutionalize the process so that information is shared writ large and available for homeowners and renters as they engage different city services. But I do point to some examples where, right, there's always going to be some challenges that we face. We've had instances where we've experienced loss where homeowners are out of state. And they just can't be reached, right? And in many instances don't become aware of a loss until they get back. So I think that there are tremendous opportunities for us to have this conversation and see if we can bridge those gaps. But recognizing that there may often, in some instances be minor examples where even that results in some failure, but nonetheless, it's a more robust system that reaches greater numbers.
Thank you.
And yes, to echo Deputy Director Danielle, ONS is working on these palm cards that would have kind of this information broken down so it's consumable, because certainly we try to kind of walk through what the process is on the scene of the fire, but understandably there's a lot going on. There's a lot of sounds, sights, people are dealing with the loss of their home. So we're hoping to roll out these cards soon, essentially just kind of make sure people have easy contact information, both to ONS, Housing Stability, and other partners as well.
Thank you.
Great,
Just thank you to the administration and thank you to the City of Cambridge. Obviously, we will continue to work on this. I'm glad to hear that fire cards are coming. Would love to have conversation with your office to ensure that those cards are as comprehensive as possible, are translated in all the languages, and that we have them ready translated in languages. For example, for in East Boston, we have them on the ready in Spanish. If we're in Dorchester, that we have them on the ready translated in Vietnamese, and so on and so forth. And to uplift with what Councilor Flynn's remark, even if you don't want to alter the cards to be specific for every district, having at least the main line for City Council so that they can know that there's an additional advocate would be helpful. So,
Thank you, Councilor Lujan. Councilor Braden, any last questions for the admin? one second, there we go.
I'd like to go back to the issue about counselling and support. Like when you have a really tragic, I know how the fire department has support for firefighters if there's a fatality in a fire, I've just watched close hand. I've seen a few of these now, and just realise how devastating it is for the folks concerned. Is there a referral for mental health support, trauma support for survivors?
I can seek to verify that. I know primarily a lot of the city's trauma response is more geared towards survivors of violent incidents and whatnot. So typically that's maybe a resident came to us seeking additional resources. We could try to connect them with something, but I don't know anything off the top of my head. I can verify that though.
Yeah. And I do appreciate how devastating, because I was at the scene of the fire in Brighton when the fatality was, how devastating it is for the firefighters. You know, they're all the adrenaline rush, and then they put everything, their lives on the line, and then they feel that, like, wow, what happened? We lost somebody, and we could have. They always have that question. Could it have been different? So I really thank the fire department for their incredible service and the incredible work that they do every day. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I would just add, may be helpful to consider broadening the conversation to include public health in that space where we talk about support services, beyond first responders and the resources that we have to support the disciplines. But with regards to the community, it may be helpful to bring them in, and Dr. Scott could be, point of contact that may be helpful.
Great, thank you, Chief Benson. Going now to Councilor Coletta.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have a formalized process for building collapses? Getting the Red Cross there. There have been multiple building collapses in the North End within the last couple of years. We were told 4 years ago that this wouldn't happen again. We've had 2 since, I think. Definitely 1. Are we triggering the same process for folks who have been displaced because of a building collapse?
So Red Cross would not step in those cases because it's not deemed an act of God, which is their definition for fire specifically. ONS would still respond to a building collapse to work with the the fire chief on the scene to identify who was displaced, who would gather that information and pass it off to house instability. I think with building collapses, when we respond to fires, typically the investigation is ongoing of what exactly was the cause of said fire. Where building collapses, it's usually pretty identifiable if it was due to neglect or due to construction that might have caused that or whatnot. So, we kind of work with the Inspectional Services Department to make sure that we're bringing information out to both the landlords and as well as the tenants as we get real-time updates from what exactly that process will look like for residents being allowed back into their buildings, what work needs to be done to kind of make the situation safe before we're allowed to step back in. And then just kind of communicating with residents, those impacted, to be documenting what their expenses are, because that likely will be a court case involving, between neighbors essentially.
Yeah.
Council, I would just add, with regards to displacements, and I don't want to speak for any of my colleagues, but as it relates to displacements, the city response is the same, right? If we have displacements, we're working to try and support those families. There may be some nuances in the background that come up, but again, in the moment, it's around supporting, residents and constituents in need. So generally speaking, the response is the same.
Okay. I am identifying this as a gap right now, because what we have seen and what I've heard from residents in the North End is that because this was a building collapse and it was just a series of unfortunate events, right? And by all accounts, that is an act of God, right? This guy did not take care of his property, and it collapsed because of snow, because of the weight of snow. And then it was a building that was empty. It didn't have any residents, but because of the North End, the way that buildings are, they're connected to one another. And so people on the left-hand side, the right-hand side, and behind were all impacted, and they were displaced. And so they were calling our office looking for resources. ONS, Chada, was incredible in getting out there and getting information, but the Red Cross did not give them, the $500 that typically comes with a fire, right? So then they were paying out of pocket. And this landlord happened to be very unresponsive, and he was also uninsured. And so it's been day 40, I think, of those folks who still can't get into their building. They were told that they could get only a couple of items of clothing. I know someone who's been living off of 4 items for the past 40 days. And so I really would love to see some process with the Red Cross for building collapses, right? I know that it's usually the fault of the owner, and in this case, we still don't know, the jury's still out on that, but the tenants are paying out of pocket right now. They did not get help from the Red Cross, and so I would like to see that process formalized.
And Council, I would just for a point of clarification, you're talking about support services after the initial response?
Yes.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
And thank you, that's extremely helpful, because I was there that day, and we were very deliberate with ensuring that they were connected. In fact, we, to some of the temporary shelter that was provided for them was in the fire department's command vehicle, and then we bought a bus, so I just wanted to make sure that I understood it, so thank you very much, appreciate that.
Of course. And thank you so much for your work, everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Coletta. Councillor Mejia?
Thank you. Just a few questions I wanted to just dig in a little bit deeper into in regards to the trauma response piece. You know, I know that Councilor Breeden was kind of asking about kind of what that looks like, and I know you mentioned there isn't, but I'm wondering if when we're talking about filling in gaps, what opportunities exist for us to work in partnership with the Boston Public Health Commission and other groups, because I think that that should be part of the triaging that we do, is to ensure that when I think about relief, I think about all things, not just financial. I think that that is definitely something that I'd like to see, so I'm just going to uplift that as something that we should figure out what that would look like. And speaking of just departments, you know, I always say that Boston is resource rich but coordination poor. And so there are a lot of opportunities here, and I'm curious what, if any, communication you have with other departments in regards to the relief efforts. I'm thinking specifically of Boston Public Schools. I'm thinking of some of the utility companies. Like when people are trying to restore their, once the fire has been put out and people are able to move back in, sometimes you have to wait for the inspectional services to come in to look at the water pipes to open things back up so that they can turn on the water. I know this because I've been working with folks who have had to go through this experience, and I've had to talk to multiple departments just to get an inspector out so that they can do this. So I'm just curious, as part of your triaging and relief efforts, kind of what coordination are you doing with other departments? And then I'm curious about students in particular in the Boston Public Schools who have experienced a fire in terms of placement, and how are we reconciling and supporting families who are now living in a hotel, but they lived in Dorchester, but their child's school was in Brighton. I'm just giving that as a place in terms of distance. What type of support services are offered to that family to get to and from their hotel to their school as part of that transition? So if you could just talk to me a little bit about that, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly, Councillor. So yes, when we respond to fires, if we notice that they're school-age children, we ask clarifying questions. Do they go to Boston Public Schools? Which schools in particular? And then we have the liaison reach out to the headmaster of said school to just flag, you know, there was a recent fire, a water main break, or whatever the incident may be that's impacted this family and they're currently displaced. So that way they can make accommodations, and they can also, I believe BPS also has resources specific to students who have been made homeless that they can tap into those as well. And regarding coordination...
I'm sorry, before you go, do you make an extra attempt to identify lodging that is close to that school so that they don't have that further hardship?
I'd have to speak to housing stability on that. We're just kind of the coordinating. We're one piece in the puzzle that kind of directs them out to which corresponding departments would work. So housing stability might be able to speak to that. And regarding other coordination with other departments, you know, be it the fire department, if there's information that maybe we're missing, we'd follow up with the police chief, fire chief, as well as victims assistance unit, coordinate with food justice if there were additional needs regarding food, as well as if issues arose with inspectional services department, we'd also have the means of contacting them as well and kind of finding where's the breakdown in the chain there.
Regarding hotel placement close to a BPS student school, it depends on availability. NOAA usually does a really great job of working with the families on a daily basis and trying to figure out what their needs are. Hotel capacity is very limited, and this is a separate issue, but we're also housing recently arrived immigrant families, so trying to accommodate those families so that they're able to transition, but also recognizing that there are hardships related to transportation. So usually NOAA is trying to figure out where locally we can house BPS students and their families that is convenient, but also working with BPS, they usually are able to provide transportation supports. And if not, we're also able to provide transportation supports to the families as well.
That's great, that's great. And let's talk a little bit about food insecurity. Because when you're living in a hotel and you get gift vouchers to Applebee's and things of that nature, that's just not sustainable after some period of time. And I'm just curious about kind of like the role that food insecurity and food justice plays in helping to support families, and what can we on the council do to better support your efforts?
Yes, absolutely.
There we go, you're good.
Okay, yeah, so, right there with you, I think these are the kinds of challenges we deal with when folks call us, where, there's a lot of gray area between the more acute situations and the chronic food insecurity that so many residents are facing. So the gift cards that we are able to provide folks facing displacement in these type of situations to support. Some of them are Visa gift cards, and the idea is that the family will have some amount of flexibility with whatever it is that they need, and some are grocery gift cards, and we'll talk with them about, do they even have access to someplace that they can use groceries, and we try to work either with ONS or directly around delivery, because in many cases, right, there's a transportation issue, obviously, or sometimes people are outside of Boston, displaced outside of Boston temporarily, or, so as of now, we've been, I think, most involved with ONS on the sort of initial response in that first week. There have been a few of the times we did follow up with NOAA after to see kind of if there was initially not a need around additional food support beyond the Red Cross voucher, is there later on would that support be helpful? And then, I think there are sort of the more general resources that we try to provide when folks contact us who are facing food insecurity, whether it's, looking at sort of a spectrum of, ultimately we want to try to find them more sustainable benefits if they're eligible. Obviously that doesn't help everybody. We work a lot with community partners who may be aware of different food distributions that change, and kind of try to cobble that together.
Thank you. I don't know if you could feel my face getting anxiety here, because I feel like the gavel's gonna come and get me because Councilor Bach doesn't play. But just want to wrap up my line of questions here. Our office has been doing a lot of work since COVID with mutual aid groups, and really helping to build their capacity. And I'm just curious what role, if any, has the city been playing to help support or partner up with some of these mutual aid groups who oftentimes are on the front lines doing a lot of this work and helping to triage situations. So I'm just curious, mutual aid groups do definitely play a big role in helping to do crisis management. So curious if anyone could talk to me about your relationship with mutual aid groups post the pandemic era.
Yeah, I'd have to speak to it really on a case-by-case basis. It's sometimes after a fire, after an incident where people are displaced, there will be organizations, nonprofits in the neighborhood that reach out to say, hey, I would love to be connected with resident. We'd love to offer our support. We would then check in with the resident to make sure that they felt comfortable having their information shared, and then we would kind of link them up together. So it really depends on, like I said, what nonprofits are in the area and which ones are reaching out to our office.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, having started my own nonprofit and working in this space, I know that resources are really tight. and a lot of people who are doing really great work usually have very little resources. So I think that the more that the city can help support. But I do think that that philanthropy is definitely, and I'm happy to see the city of Cambridge really leaning into philanthropy and private funding, because there's just so much that the city can do. And oftentimes you just are going to need those private partners to be able to fill that gap. And I think that the more that we can help support and building that infrastructure for the city, the better success you're going to have in terms of meeting the immediate needs of folks, because the red tape is very different, right? When you're working with a nonprofit foundation or working with folks. But I do think, not to let the city off the hook here, y'all play a role in this too, but I do think that there's a lot of opportunity to help fill those gaps, both from the city perspective, and how do you support nonprofit organizations, and how do you hold people who are doing business here in the city of Boston accountable to being good business partners, because I think that they have a role to play in that. And I am not going to spend any more of my time holding you hostage here, so I know I don't have any more time, and I do appreciate the chair's grace of allowing me to keep on babbling. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. And yeah, this is a really important topic. We are going to let you go in a second so that we can hear from our last panel. I think just the two things that I really wanted to amplify, one of them was this point about mental health support afterwards. And I think Chief Benson, a great point about trying to bring public health in here. I will just say that for my office, the people who we have helped who have experienced displacement due to a sudden event, whether it's a fire, a building collapse, a flood, I just feel like in addition to all of the tangible things that they need, it's incredibly disorienting. Like the experience of like, you think your life is going along fine, you think you have a place to stay, like, and then suddenly like everything in your life is disrupted. And we know that whether that's kids like schooling or, for an adult, their commute to work, or just like any number of things, I think it's just the mental toll of that's really huge. So I think thinking about, what are the ways that we can provide support there, and whether it's finding consistent nonprofit partners who can help with that. I mean, we know we're in a landscape where like nobody is getting the kind of mental health support that they need, but it does feel as though this is a place where, just from our observation, we really see people experiencing that acute kind of spiral, even in kind of like the whole year after it happens. The other thing is I just really wanted to amplify Councilor Coletta's point about building collapses. I had a building in my district, which recently in Beacon Hill, where the building was leaning, cracking, kind of obviously had a major problem. The tenants were very alarmed. There was kind of, structural engineers report saying, no, it's really fine. And then suddenly it was, no, it's not fine, actually, and everybody needs to get out. And I think the real problem we saw there, and it gets back to this water and sewer point I was making, is that, there's now a legal case over, was that the fault of the construction work that was going on next door, or was that the fault of the building owner for not shoring up their foundations? Well, the people whose fault it was not was the tenants, right? And I think like this dynamic where I understand the view that like we as the public can't take on the like responsibility of the private side. Like, the theory is that we're trying to hold these landowners, like landlords, right, to account and say, hey, you're the one who needs to pay up in this situation. But tenants in that acute moment of need, they can't wait. And it's really unfair when they become the kind of like stuck in between of these like private lawsuits that could drag on for, many months or years. And so I just think like, obviously in my ideal world, the city would be able to spend a bunch of money up front in support of these families and then bill the responsible party after that was determined, because from a kind of responsibility perspective. But I think fundamentally as a counselor, like my number one agenda is that those people get help in the period in which they need it. And I just feel like they end up in this really strange position. And also like a lot of times nobody wants to talk to them about the details of the situation because they're suing over it. And then maybe also even like our ISD folks are worried about making statements affirmatively about what's happened because they know there's a lawsuit going on. And so I just, I really want to amplify that, like, I understand the additional complexities of the building related issue, but I don't think that as the city, we can just kind of dwell there. Like, I think we have to figure out a more proactive solution to this type of situation, rather than just being like, well, it's really complicated because of these additional factors. So I don't know if any of you want to say anything on that or on the mental health point, but those were kind of the two big things I wanted to highlight.
I would just add, ma'am, excuse me, you mentioned ISD. I would, again, add them as an additional stakeholder. We know that when we have these building collapses, particularly when it's a work zone, that it has implications for both the state regulators as well as federal regulators. And our initial point of contact and liaise between the city and those agencies would be through ISD. So I think it would be helpful to understand that contextually, because I think that does drive ultimately when we're trying to get people back into their homes. If there are other implications that are tied to an investigation and or tied to building standards as to why individuals may not be able to proceed, could be helpful in helping us to contextualize how we set a plan that is truly representative of all the different facets of city government. So I would just mention that. And just before we close, I just want to send a nod to the Salvation Army. They're extremely helpful in supporting us in the same space as American Red Cross does. So I just want to make sure that we are diligently representing them.
Great. Thank you so much, Chief Benford. And I think I said Benson earlier, so my apologies. Anyways, anybody else on that? Yes, Commissioner, please.
I would just like to say that some of the proudest moments of my job is seeing how city employees interact at a fire. Not just firefighters, everybody at this table, including the Red Cross. The compassion level that city employees share with these people, it's amazing. It gives you a good feeling to see how dedicated the city is to helping people that have had a hard event take place in their life. So I just wanted you to know that. You're not all there at all times, but the city employees really step up when things like this happen, and I'm proud to be one of them. It's a great work for the city.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioner, for saying that. I strongly agree. And I would also say that it was alluded to earlier, but I think that, the city also plays a really important role in calling other stakeholders to the table. I mean, certainly I saw when we had this major displacement of affordable housing tenants in my district due to a building flood, ultimately the Planning Office of Urban Affairs stepped up and got those folks housed, and that was something that Chief Dillon was really involved in making happen. They were getting funds for food from NOAA and also from like my office and Councilor Livingstone's office, Rep. Livingstone's office. And so I think for each of us councilors, when we've been involved in one of these, we've really seen firsthand, like you say, like all those kind of stakeholders come in and say, hey, how do we help these people in their hour of need? So I think when we look to systematize it and bring more stakeholders to the table, it really is just to like make sure that nobody falls through the cracks, like Councilor Louis Jen said. But I think the existing responsiveness is amazing, and we really appreciate it. All right, with that, I'm going to dismiss the administration panel. Thank you so much for being with us for a couple of hours, more than a couple of hours today. I'm just going to let Councilor Braden say a quick word because I know she has to go. So and then we'll have our Red Cross and NOAA folks come join us at the panel. Councilor Braden.
Thank you, and thank you to the city panel for being here. Thank you for all your great work. Unfortunately, I have to not be able to stay for the next panel, but I do know the great work that the Red Cross, and as someone also mentioned, the Salvation Army and other agencies that help from the non-profit sector help with disaster relief. This has been an incredibly important conversation this morning. I think we've got some good takeaways. I think we've got some action steps that we might be able to follow up on. So thank you, and thank you to my co-sponsors and thank you, Madam Chair, for this good hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. All right, so we welcome. Thank you, Commissioner, again for joining us, and we'd welcome our panelists. So we've got, if we can queue up, I think we've got NOAA queued up there. Oh, great, excellent, fantastic. And is that Linda on the screen right now?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. And thank you for being with us for a long hearing. We appreciate it. Okay, so, and I think I'm joined here by Tim Petoniak, Regional Disaster Coordinator for the Red Cross. And Tim, I'll ask you to introduce your colleagues. And then also we've got Linda Foster here, the Director of Administration and Fundraising from NOAA. So I'll go first to the Red Cross and then to NOAA, and then we'll do questions. Tim, you have the floor. Yeah, sorry, 1 second. Let me make sure that you've got your mic on. And again, the way this works is you just have to... No, just wait. Just wait. The red light. Ethan or Cora, can somebody turn Tim's mic on? Just wait a minute. Here we go. Now we're good.
Sorry. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Tim Petoniak. I'm the Regional Disaster Officer for the state of Massachusetts Red Cross. I'm here with Sharifa Troutman, who is our Disaster Program Manager that oversees the area of Boston, and with Paul Jacobson, who is one of our community...
What's my title?
What's your title exactly?
Community volunteer leader.
So thank you so much, first of all, for having us here. I have a brief statement to start off with. The American Red Cross, the mission of the American Red Cross is to prevent and alleviate human suffering. The Red Cross responds to an average of 60,000 disasters each year, most of which are fires. Every 8 minutes, the Red Cross helps a family affected by a home fire or other disaster. In Massachusetts, the Red Cross responds to over 700 fires each year. That's 2 a day, and about a third of those are in the city of Boston. Our volunteers provide urgent relief to clients in what might be the worst day of their lives. After a home fire or other disaster, Boston Fire Department or Boston Emergency Management contacts the Red Cross day or night, and our local trained Red Cross volunteers are ready to respond. Red Cross caseworkers may connect one-on-one with clients to create individual recovery plans, navigate paperwork, help, or find other organizations that can help. In some situations, the Red Cross may provide financial support directly to people who need extra help. This assistance is critical, as in 2020, a study showed that nearly 40% of adults would need to borrow money or sell personal items to cover unexpected expenses over $400. Financial assistance from the Red Cross can help pay for a deposit in a new apartment, replace lost clothing or other belongings, or cover transportation expenses or any other urgent need. To help communities recover, the Red Cross often brings groups and agencies together to plan recovery activities. The Red Cross is a charity and not a government agency. The people who have disaster-caused needs do not need to be American citizens to access Red Cross services. Red Cross services are free and available to all those who need it, thanks to the generosity of our donors. I'd like to take a second to talk about our preparedness program. We have a home fire preparedness program which helps people become safe for fires. So home fires take 7 lives each day in the United States, most often in homes without working smoke alarms. Every second counts when there's a home fire. Home fires are so dangerous that they claim more lives in a typical year than all other natural disasters combined. But with working smoke alarms, you can cut the risk of dying in a home fire in half. The sooner an alarm alerts you to a fire, the sooner you can get out. This is critical because fire experts say you may have less than 2 minutes to escape a burning home before it's too late. The Red Cross is working with our partners to install free smoke alarms and help residents create 2 minutes fire escape plans and share safety information on home fires and other disasters. On Saturday, April 29th, the Red Cross, in partnership with Boston Fire, will sound the alarm in the neighborhoods of Dorchester and Roxbury to make over 250 homes safer by installing free smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and educating families in fire safety. Sound the Alarm is an event part of our National Home Fire Campaign, which has saved almost 100 lives and installed 2.5 million free smoke alarms throughout the country in high-risk communities since its inception. I really thank you all for the opportunity to be here, and I welcome any and all of your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. And we'll go now to Linda from NOAA, and then we'll do questions together for both. Linda Foster from Director of Administration and Fundraising from NOAA, you have the floor.
Oh, well, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone, for having us today. And it's been great to listen and get new ideas, especially, about coordinating with other departments and also, the fundraising from outside sources. It's all great ideas. Just a little bit about NOAA. NOAA stands for the Neighborhood of Affordable Housing. We've been around for about 37 years, started in East Boston, and now serve all of Boston and the greater Boston area. We typically serve about 2,600 families in the area of housing every year, and about 500 in the area of neighborhood services. And that adds up to about 4,500 individuals each year. We have a number of different programs for housing services, including foreclosure prevention, first-time home buyer, building housing, having our own housing units, a limited number, less than 400, and also some other service lines that we are very grateful to the city for partnering with us. For one of those is to help fire victims and other homeless victims as well. So far this year, since July 1st for the fiscal year, we have served about 232 clients through the programming for the homeless prevention program. And those include the fire victims in Boston. And happy to, just say again, we're very grateful to the city for allowing NOAA to partner and assist with Boston and City. And then that's it. I can answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda. So now I'll go to my colleagues again for questions for both of these fantastic partners to the city, starting with Councilor Louis-Jean.
Thank you, and I really appreciate all the work that the Red Cross and that NOAA is doing when we're responding to fires. I think you all have a vantage point that can be really helpful when we're talking about systems improvement. So my first question is for NOAA. At what point does the city contact you when a family has experienced a fire? Like, when do you get that phone call?
So we get it electronically now through the Salesforce online system, and we usually get it very quickly. First of all, NOAA does have free nighttime and weekend and holiday case managers that are connected with the 311 program. So if it's overnight or on the weekend, we find out about it immediately because our case manager on duty gets called to help with that. During the daytime, very, very quickly, I would say, we are alerted by the Office of Housing Stability when there is a need for clients to have some assistance. It's fairly quick.
Thank you. And I'm just trying to break it down into like who are the immediate term responses, the midterm, and the long term. I take the Red Cross to be the immediate term. And just for the clarity of the record, because a lot of people spoke to what the American Red Cross does, and we now have you before us, and so we'd like to hear from you. What is it that you're providing to families immediately after a fire?
Thank you so much. Yeah, we are the short-term immediate needs. So to the first part of the question, we get called pretty much immediately when there's a fire and there's people displaced, and we send volunteers to the scene. We endeavor to be in the scene before 2 hours. A lot of times we're there quicker, but it does kind of depend. Once we get there, it depends on the situation sometimes. Immediately out the gate, I can just read through what we can give out as far as money. Mm-hmm. So for one unit household, it's $350. For 2 to 4, it's $640. For 5 to 7, it's $875, and for 8+, it's $1236. So that's like immediate.
And is that in the form of a gift card?
Form of a gift card, or in the form of what we call an ETF, so we can directly transfer it to an account, PayPal, or various, like whatever works for the client. So we can do either immediately. The one thing that I'd like to clear up, because it didn't seem like this was something that folks know about, first of all, that money, the clients can do whatever they want with it. It's not a voucher for a hotel, it is money to help them recover. The second piece is we have a whole nother system, which is our follow-up casework, where they're calling those clients every day to make sure, how can we connect you with resources? What are you doing? These are people that are experienced and kind of can help them like patch things together. There are also places where if clients have certain roadblocks, there are other batches of money that we can provide. So if a client couldn't get all the way with a certain amount of money, there are other monies that can be available to them. Like I said before, we are for immediate short-term need, so it kind of, there's a limit to it, but we do not end the conversation that night. We continue with the client for weeks after.
And that provision of funds, so it's not if someone needs an immediate, a hotel to stay in for a night or 2 or 3.
Right.
Does that come out of this pot that you are able to provide, or is that separate?
It absolutely can.
Okay, so
there
it
used to be a
varies.
time when this was the money for your lodging, this is the money for everything else. The organization made a decision that we didn't want to dictate to the clients. Here's the money, do with it what you will. We have our disaster action team members are often familiar with the hotels and can help coordinate that if need be, but it is not something where this money is earmarked for anything. Clients can do what they want with it.
And when you're in the business of hotel provision, is there a max number of nights for which you will cover a family, or does that also depend?
We don't pay for it. They can pay for it or not pay for it. So they can use the money however they see fit, but we don't pay for hotels. Sorry if that wasn't clear.
No. Okay, so let me ask this one clarifying question. There's the money that you give them,
Right.
and then there's also the opportunity, or not that's it?
The money's the money.
The money is the money,
Yeah.
okay. I think that handles that question.
One piece, sorry to make it more confusing, there is a piece of we can give direct client assistance in some cases, and this is a situation that might address some of the things that have come up. We can open a shelter or work with the city to open a shelter, which is another thing we can provide, particularly, and this happened in Lowell and Lynn, there was a water main break. We cannot give out that money. It is outside of our scope to give out that money. But we can offer mass care services, so we can work to open up a shelter, feed at that shelter, take care of those folks. So our hands are not completely tied, and we are not completely out of the game. It's just we cannot provide the funds I just described if it is not something that is directly disaster caused.
Great. Well, thank you for that answer. I had a question that was actually for that administration, but I think this could be a good question for you all. So we predominantly focus on families for good reason, especially we have young children who are displaced. We have, those are tragic situations, but individuals also experience fires and tend to be victims of fires. How do you compare sort of the experience of helping an individual person who's a victim of fire compared to a family, and like where are there gaps in sort of how we're showing up for individuals experiencing, especially when it comes to Director Johnson, she is here, but we're a right to shelter state for families, but not for individuals. So I think we could face particular challenges when it comes to ensuring that we are providing shelter to individuals. So love to hear some insight there.
Yeah, I mean, as I laid out, the more people in the family, the more money we can give you. We treat all our clients the same, and I feel in general, I don't hear about a huge discrepancy between individuals and families. The only other piece is if you're in a family, those roadblocks I described have a lot of those roadblocks come through having a family, having a young child, caring for an elderly person. So there are less immediate resources to the individual, and they get less money. And Sharif, I don't know if you've had experience with this, but I've not heard any other kind of like limitations, at least from a Red Cross perspective.
No, the services remain the same. I think the only thing that we may face a challenge with is typically the fire department calls Red Cross when they're calling for victims assistance. We respond when there's one person. I don't think victims assistance responds when there's one person displaced. So typically there could be a lag there where the client is reaching out to us on their own. Sometimes the fire department will call, sometimes not. So there could be a little lag there, but there's no difference in service when it comes to Red Cross services when one person is displaced or 8.
Thank you. And last question, given that you all have a statewide lens, wondering if there are things that you see other cities doing and providing resources and assistance to families experiencing fires or other sort of disaster emergencies that you think could be helpful for us to consider or implement. And if you don't have a direct answer,
I won't waste time. I can get you some real specifics. I know Cambridge was a great example. Also, we had just had a big fire in New Bedford. They have a great recovery system there that we work with. Sharif, it seemed like, did you have something you want to jump in on there?
No, I think for the cities that I cover in the greater Boston territory, I think they basically do exactly what you guys are seeking to do here with the Disaster Relief Fund, where when people are displaced, Red Cross comes out, we give out our assistance if we can, and then they can tap into the other resources to help the displaced out.
But I can, I'm sorry, didn't I?
No.
I can speak directly with the recovery team and give you like the cities that are doing things differently that we find most helpful.
Thank you, and appreciate your time here.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Louis-Jean. Councilor Coletta?
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your work. I have seen the Red Cross on scene working with residents, and you all are incredibly empathetic to folks, and the way you carry yourselves is amazing. So I just want to say thank you to that. I also want to give a shout out to Linda, who answers my call sometimes at 12 a.m., sometimes even later than that. So I just want to say thank you so much for your work and everything that you do, not only for fire and disaster relief, but also supporting migrant families that come through. So thank you so much. Has there ever been an instance, and I think this is just clarifying, a clarifying question for me, because when I was on the scene at one point in East Boston this past winter, a fire chief had told me that sometimes he makes calls to the Red Cross and is denied service. Does that ever happen, or is it supposed to happen?
If it's for a fire, no.
Okay, so the Red Cross, no matter what, if the fire department calls you?
The fire department will call our answering service. It goes directly to what we call a duty officer, who are on call 24/7. And if we can confirm the fire and people are displaced, we go. The place where sometimes it's gray is hoarding situations or anything that's, not disaster related. We can, like I said, that we have limited ways to respond to that point. But if somebody's displaced because of a fire, we go.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate you saying that on the record.
And thank you for pointing that out, because now I know there needs to be a conversation.
For sure.
So-
Yes, there needs to be a conversation. And so just underscoring the need for some relief during building collapses, I would love to see that process a little bit more formalized. But now what you're saying is that we can pull together Red Cross resources to house folks in various locations, right? And that typically happens. Would that be something that building collapses would fall under?
If there was a building collapse or there was a pipe burst, we can work to help, but we can't give direct client assistance. Okay. So there are other ways that we can support. There are ways that, like I said, we just did this in Lawrence and Lynn, where we opened a shelter and worked with the city, and we can absolutely be at the table. It's just we cannot provide those cards or that direct client assistance in those situations.
Okay. Thank you.
And sorry, just to add on to what Tim said, I think at that point it's a conversation with Red Cross and the city. It's not Red Cross taking the lead
Correct.
to open up a shelter in Boston. That's a conversation between Red Cross and OEM to kind of move that forward. Does that make sense?
It does, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
Separately, so we're talking a lot about monetary support, but I do see here that you provide supplies as well, which is desperately needed in some of these moments of people's lives where they literally have just lost everything. For example, if there's somebody, a new parent, who needs diapers or formula or supplies of that nature, do you all provide that, and do you let folks know that that's something that is within your warehouse? And I'm just thinking back again to a parent who had smoke damage to all of her baby supplies, and she had mentioned that she didn't have anything. And so I just didn't know if that was something that you all supply, or if it just varies based on the situation.
Well, Shriva, do you want to take this one? Talk about what's an emergency response vehicle?
Sure. So when we go out on scene, a lot of times we have some type of Red Cross vehicle that's fully stocked with like hygiene kits. There we have our recovery folder with some next step information for the clients. So we have a kid's hygiene kit, that sort of thing. Now, if a client explains, they have all their baby stuff up, a lot of times we do have things like that in the vehicle, and if not, they can definitely use that card. And then we also refer to like Cradles and Crayons, who could also help supply some of those things. But immediately, the baby needs changing, we can absolutely provide those things.
Okay. I didn't know about the referral to
Cradles to Crayons.
Cradles to Crayons, so that's excellent. Thank you so much.
And two pieces of it's all right. The other, what Shriva described, a large part of what the Red Cross does is connecting to other agencies. Those recovery folks, there's a very limit to what we can do as Red Cross, but we know of a lot of other organizations that can fill in these gaps. So that's a lot of what we do. And the other thing I did not say is we are 90% volunteers. So when you see people on scene, those are not paid staff. Mm-hmm. Those are people that are volunteers, whether they're people picking up the phone or going out. Just to give some context, because I should have mentioned that earlier.
No, thank you for uplifting that. And again, just your team is absolutely incredible, and everybody has just been so respectful of the situation and folks who are going through a difficult time. I'm going to have a question for Linda. Linda, it seems as though, so you had mentioned since July 1st, it was 232 families that you've serviced. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. How is your staffing capacity? I know that you mentioned you have case managers who work on this. How are you doing in terms of capacity? And then how does that impact, if it does impact at all, your response times to victims?
So we have 3 full-time case managers that respond to the city programming. And we also have 3 part-time, nighttime staffers, on-call workers who respond on a rotating basis overnight and weekends.
Thank you. So,
And as far as
sorry, go ahead.
as far as capacity, you know, we're okay. You know, it gets a little tight when there's multiple emergencies, but we are okay.
Thank you so much. That's it for my questioning, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Coletta. And Councilor Mejia.
And thank you all for your partnership throughout COVID. We worked in deep partnership with you all around food insecurity issues, so thank you for your work in that space. I just have 3 questions. Aren't you glad? Or I may not. But just really quick, I'm just curious about supports for people who don't have access to Cash App or any other type of, monetary transactional online services, like kind of what that support looks like. I'm also curious about folks for check cashing. I know that you can write a check and you can go to Western Union and cash it, but there are some fees there, so I'm just curious about kind of like helping to fill that gap. Every single cent is going to matter, so I'm just curious, do you do a little extra to cover up some of those fees? And then I'm curious if you could just talk to us a little bit about what is considered a family. I know that, there are folks who are living in multiple, like the example that Councilor Coletta gave about multiple families living in one household unit. And that is something that I've experienced as a kid growing up. We had a 3-bedroom and there were 3 different households sharing that space, just to stay here in the city of Boston. And so when we think about a fire and we think about a response, are we treating those individuals who lived in that unit as individual families? Or is it just everybody, this is the unit and you all gonna get one lump sum and y'all gonna have to divide it up? So if you could just talk to us about that. And then I'm just curious about what your support work and collaboration looks like with mutual aid groups.
Sure. No, I'll take as much as I can, and then you can just fill in the rest. So the family piece. The family is defined by our clients. So we go to a place, they tell us how many families are there. So sometimes folks decide to recover together. Sometimes people want to recover as a family, but that is not something that has anything to do with the confines of, X amount of walls. If 10 people come out and that they're 10 different families, I mean, that probably is an extreme example, but we will they will dictate what we define a family as. As far as the cash apps, that is something that we have found that many of our clients prefer, but it is not a necessity. So we will give you electronic transfer if that is what you want. If not, we give you a credit card that can be used anywhere. So there's no need to cash checking, things like that. It's just it's a debit card that you can use wherever you want to, but we also offer the ability to send the funds to you directly, which we found that increasingly clients prefer. As far as being collaborative, I could speak and I could get you more details offline, but like I said before, after the fire happens, our casework recovery folks are calling the clients, figuring out what their needs are, and then they have a whole suite of different both regional and local groups that can give support, like Sharifa message. There are people that are specifically there to give out things like diapers and things for kids. There are places like churches that give out clothing after disaster. There are a number of different resources, and their job is to be experts on those and make sure we're filling in those gaps, connecting clients with the resources they need. Sharifa, did I miss anything?
You did not. The only thing I want to add is our recovery team also has different kind of departments underneath it. So we have disaster mental health, disaster spiritual care, disaster health services that can also help supplement some of those other things that people are going through at the time of the fire or whatever disaster they just went through. And that's something that can also be offered to clients that was not displaced by a fire, but maybe they had the building collapse and they still want to meet with Red Cross. We can absolutely do that without offering that immediate assistance. We can open up a case and they can still take advantage of those other resources.
Fantastic point. Health service and mental health are on call 24/7. Health service can provide counseling and mental health can provide counseling, and then health service can do things like replace glasses or find medication or all sorts of things like that the clients might need after they're displaced.
Yeah, no, and I really do appreciate the focus on mental health and wellness, because I think that usually gets lost in all issues of recovery. This is like, we just want to get you the basics, but I think that as part of the recovery, mental health should be one of those things that are on top of mind. And then the last question that I'll ask, I'm like so traumatized. So how am I doing for time?
You're good. Go ahead.
So just the last question that I have is really around, I've been learning a lot about emotional intelligence and how, especially if you're a person that has grown up dealing with systems, that sometimes people speak to you in ways that could really prevent you from wanting to continue to pursue or support or seek the support that you need, because people are mean. Not because they want to be, just because they don't know how to talk to people. So I'm just curious in terms of culturally responsive training and supports, and kind of like how you all are gearing up. I mean, I know you're a service, entity, so you have that, but I'm just curious, what does that look like when you are onboarding your team to be out in front of people who are experiencing trauma? What does your cultural competency training look like? What are your emotional intelligence training, if any, look like? And I'm also curious about staffing in terms of language access and all that good stuff. If you could just give me a sense of what that looks like.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we just last weekend at Cumberland Farms trained 120 volunteers in all sorts of disaster courses. Those include things like psychological first aid, working with diversity. What was the one that you attended? It was with Allie.
Community external partnerships?
Community external partnerships, and then we also had working with undocumented. So all this stuff, like, we take it very seriously, and our people are incredibly well trained. So you don't get to be someone who hands out a card to a client unless you've gone through all these trainings, and these trainings renew. So it's not as though you can be stagnant and take those trainings, and then we are changing them and evolving on a constant basis. So training is something we can talk offline, but we have a lot of training to make sure that our volunteers are able to address those things you talked about with clients, and be respectful and be aware culturally, and also be cognizant of all the different things that go into a disaster. So those things exist. As far as languages, we endeavor to have as many languages as possible with our volunteers, and where we fall short, we have a language line that can speak any language. So if a worst case scenario happens and we don't have somebody on scene that can speak that language, we can use a agency that we have to do a translator for any language that you can think of.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Linda, do you want to share anything that we can help support in terms of building capacity, or any issues that you want to uplift?
Well, just some ideas and thoughts. There's some wonderful ideas here about, as I mentioned before, about coordinating between departments. That's great. There's also some great ideas about getting outside agencies or corporations to perhaps make a donation, to some kind of fund. There's so much that people need. If they've lost their identification, they've lost their wallet, they've lost their ability to access any cash. There's no money for anything, including food. I know the Red Cross has a wonderful, wonderful cash gift, but once that's gone, then there's issues of how do you buy the diapers and the formula and the food for the family. The hotel stays that are provided come with a free breakfast, which is great, but then there's, and of course the coordinating with the City of Boston. Food provision is awesome. But there's so many other things, as people have mentioned, that I love the fact that you're bringing everybody together here to brainstorm and come up with other areas that can fill the gaps that are needed, because there are some that we all see and want to help fill, I know.
Thank you. And I just wanted to note that I do have a 1 o'clock and a hard stop, but I just did not want to end my time without in gratitude and just letting you know how much we appreciate the work and the partnership that we have with our nonprofit partners. And I think that as I continue to grow in this chamber, what I realize is that in terms of lived experience, it's really important because there's lots of things that are hypothetical and that you learn about it in a textbook, but living it and navigating it and having an opportunity to hear from people as they continue to go through the trauma response, I think that that is definitely something that I really want to make sure that we continue both as the nonprofit, private philanthropy and city, is that the response has to be the whole person and all resources to help people recover.
So these guys are good. I'm going to take up 1 minute of your time. So these guys are amazing at doing also preventative work with their home fire preparedness program. April 29th, they're going to be in Dorchester and Roxbury doing their Sound the Alarm program. We'd love to have you come. I've reached out to, because we're going to be in Dorchester and Roxbury, I've reached out to the council members who are in that district because we'd love to have you come join us. We've already seen 140 families respond to this, that they would like us to come into their homes and install fire alarms, do our home education program, and we need at least that many volunteers. So you're going to see an amazing coordinated effort by this fabulous humanitarian organization. And it is, I mean, truly, as a volunteer, it's amazing to be a volunteer. Me and 299,000 of my closest friends are volunteers for this organization. So you'll see an amazing coordinated effort on that day. We'd love to have you come join us. I mean, truly, it's an honor to volunteer for them. We'd love to have you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. And then I just have one or two questions, and then I'm going to go to my colleagues, Councilor Lujan and Councilor Coletta, just for if they have one more question, and then closing statements. And then we'll go to public testimony. I don't currently have anyone signed up, so if you are watching this and you want to sign up, you should be emailing cora.montrond@boston.gov right now to get the link. Or signing up in the chamber in the corner, and otherwise you watch this after the fact, you can email us testimony@ccc.csit@boston.gov. So just, I guess a quick question from me, well, two quick questions. One is this question of how is the Red Cross thinking about this, this kind of long tail of like mental health, like trauma, and kind of, because obviously, I mean, you guys, you have made your bread and butter the sort of Johnny on the spot. You're there and you're doing the immediate work, and we're so glad for that. So don't take this as me saying like, and can you also? But but I guess it just feels like we're all recognizing the huge mental health components of so many issues in our society these days. And so I'm just curious to what extent the agency's kind of thought about that and thought about partners to connect to.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that we are constantly evolving. I've been with the organization nearly 20 years, and it is every year we change and we try to do more for our clients. On large recovery operations, we've actually extended the way we look at jobs a lot. As you know, right now we're that immediate helping hand, but we're doing everything we can to get in that space and kind of be longer term recovery. I can't say about anything that's going to happen tomorrow, but it is a conversation, and it is something that we are constantly looking, whether it's climate change or it's just, how there's, more people, like the housing scarcity and more people living in fewer places. These are all things we're actively talking about and actually actively reviewing policy to see how we can do better.
That's great to hear. Yeah, no, and I do wonder about you mentioned the housing scarcity. It's both like results in more people living in fewer places, and we obviously saw that intensely, right, with the impacts, the differential impacts of the pandemic in like a place like Chelsea, where you had that really intense like housing situation in neighborhoods of our city. I think there's also this piece, and it kind of relates to this building collapse issue. And I recognize that, like, you guys have this kind of fire line in order to try to limit the scope to something doable. But, I think a lot about the fact that the lack of any housing vacancy in our city is causing people to have to accept substandard housing conditions. And, in other hearings, we've talked about how part of that means that our role as the city is to do better enforcement on substandard conditions and really hold landlords to account. But I also do think we're seeing like more and more of these like man-made disasters, because it used to be that people would just be like, no, this isn't good enough housing, I'm going to go find housing somewhere else. But when there's like literally not a unit in the neighborhood that's open, like, I think people just end up stuck. And so that question of kind of how much of this kind of sudden disaster like human misery is that causing, and how to think about it is something we all have to think about, but it'd be great to have the Red Cross thinking about that as well. And then my other question is just, it's really to both the Red Cross and to NOAA. And sorry, also, Linda, I realize if you had anything to say on the mental health front, I would love to hear that. But my other question is just because for the Red Cross, you work with multiple partners, we're only one municipality of so many that you work with. Just if there's anything that other like cities and towns do that it sort of seem like, oh, this is a best practice, or like we love like the places that do this, without faulting Boston. We try to think of everything first, but occasionally there's something we could learn from someone else. So that's sort of my question to you, is like anything that's really great with another municipal partner that we might want to consider copying, besides the thing we talked about with Cambridge today. And then maybe Linda, did you want to say anything on that mental health front?
Just basically that, what we've been doing with our case managers is giving them trauma-related training. We do have one of our case managers who has a certificate who's a social worker and has a certificate in trauma. So we really have her take a quick look now at our different cases that case managers are having issues with, and giving us a sort of a different lens to take a look at the mental health piece for clients. And some of the ideas we're coming up with is to, make referrals as needed, or perhaps an intense care coordinator if that needs to be done. And this is just in the works, so any suggestions would be welcome. We're thinking of making suggestions and referrals to the Children's Services of Roxbury, or Home for Little Wanderers, et cetera, as needed, in addition to the other housing-related services that we provide.
That's great to hear, Linda. I'm really glad you guys are working on that front, and definitely something that I think the council would love to help be supportive of. Any thoughts?
Sure. Shriva, do you want to talk specifically about Metro, and I'll talk about the state?
Sure. One thing that I've seen to be very helpful that we can use as a best practice in Boston is we have a recovery manager who puts together these recovery groups where after a fire you have all like the key players there at one table discussing how we can kind of wrap our arms around the displaced families. And it's been very successful in other cities where you're not just meeting after a fire, you're meeting all the time to talk about what changes happen in your organization, kind of what's coming, how can we help differently. So you have somebody from the city, you have Red Cross at the table, you have Salvation Army, whoever, ONS is there, so that we can really keep that conversation going, and it's not happening right after the fire and we're all kind of scrambling like, oh, you're doing this, we could do this. Oh man, now we don't have this piece, So it kind of keeps it going, and it makes the process that much smoother for everyone involved, the organizations, the city, and the clients.
That's great.
Yeah, same statewide. I think anecdotally, like both Lawrence and New Bedford, we have really good relationships in situations like that. But I can come back to the panel and talk to my recovery team and say, where are some best practices that we can share. But in general, as Sharifa said, it is always best to exchange business cards before and not after a disaster. So the more that we can kind of be in these conversations before something happens, the more effective we'll all be.
Yeah, no, it's amazing how tried and true just getting all the stakeholders in a room regularly is as a strategy. Obviously, that's been, I think, huge for the city of Boston's response to veterans homelessness, and then kind of like following up on like youth homelessness, family homelessness, I think having everybody in the room so it's not kind of like, oh, I'll check in with so-and-so, and then like 2 weeks pass, and especially when people are in acute situations in their lives, right? Like it's, you can passing the ball can take a lot of time that people can't really afford for us all to take. So, yeah, no, really appreciate that suggestion. And I think, it's always, as much as we like to pull everybody together for hearings here on the city council, we hope even more that people are getting together and talking, not in the hearing chamber, and sort of having this go on. So I really appreciate the sponsors, Councillor Liu Jen and Councillor Braden and Councillor Flaherty, and then also Councillor Coletta, who have all kind of pushed for the council to put a focus on this issue. But I think, we're all eager to keep supporting all of the stakeholders here doing more and more. And I will just say one note to Linda is that, I think we also need to amplify for folks the fact that NOAA is now playing this citywide role. Like when we had this building flood in my district and actually Age Strong said, oh, we can actually get them some food money through NOAA. Like my initial reaction as a counselor was like, oh, can my folks get something from NOAA? Because I know NOAA is associated with East Boston. So I was thrilled that they could. But I think, this is a good opportunity for us to amplify the fact that you're now in that kind of citywide partnership role as well. So I'll just go to my colleagues for any last question / closing statement. Councillor Liu Jen.
Yes, I thank you, Chair. I want to just thank everyone again for coming together and sharing with us how you approach this work and potential holes. And I want to thank the City of Cambridge for coming and presenting ideas. You've heard both from me and from Councillor Bach about a desire to learn from all of you about what else you've learned from being practitioners in this space about what we can do here in Boston. I want to uplift. I'm an at-large city councilor, so I hear about fires happening throughout the city, and I care about fires happening throughout the city, whether they're in East Boston, where one of the neighborhoods that Councilor Coletta covers, or whether they are in Mission Hill, a neighborhood that Councilor Bach covers. And I think that we need to be intentional about our resources, but also thinking about one question that I didn't ask Cambridge was what does a fundraising look like for this disaster relief fund, for us to sort of think about what it would look like to do that here. One question that I have for you, Linda, is just probably, this may be slightly repetitive, but just for clarity of record, is a process question, because the Red Cross, you are short-term immediate response. NOAA, you are working along with the city to be more of a mid to long-term response. So just a question about process. Once you're notified, how do you respond? How much money are you able to give to families or assistance? And what does the paperwork look like that families need?
Okay, sure. So I would actually say, include us more in the short term as well, because depending on what a family decides to use their Red Cross funds for, they may or may not have funds for sheltering or a hotel room. So it's pretty immediate as well, and extends through intensive care, intensive case management, housing search, ongoing support, stabilization, and then a big key component of the city support for this is financial assistance once a new unit is found. And I believe Danielle mentioned that earlier, that they can provide, the city funds can provide through NOAA up to $4,500 of move-in costs for first, last, security, et cetera. So it's pretty much both immediate and longer term, I guess, is a sort of a way to answer that question.
Thank you, Linda. And I appreciate them thinking about rent, and councilors have been saying how we've all been talking about how the rent is rising, and $4,500 is a good amount of money, but I feel like very few people are finding, if we're talking about families, are finding rental units at $1,500, which would be, $1,500 for first months, last months in security. So just putting that out there. But wanted to follow this thread. If they use the Red Cross money to cover 4 nights of a hotel stay, 5 nights of a hotel stay, and that runs out, can NOAA, via the city's emergency relief fund, can NOAA help them with additional hotel days or hotel stays?
Yes.
Is there a limit on the number of? Is there a limit on the number of hotel days?
There is. Typically, it's 7 nights if you're talking adults, longer if you're talking families with children, up to a month. There's an exception if someone is elderly, if there's someone ill in the family, then the stays can be longer. And sometimes the stays are longer just because they have to be, and there's no place else for the family to go, or the individual to go. So yes, the answer is yes, we can help with hotel stays, after the Red Cross money and oftentimes after that.
Awesome. Thank you, Linda. And I just want to thank everyone who's intervening in the lives of families and individuals whose lives are forever changed after these disasters and fires. So thank you. We have work to do here on the council to make sure that we are providing the adequate resources to our families and thinking creatively about what other cities are doing and what we can do here on behalf of all residents in the city of Boston who unfortunately have to undergo this. I want to thank again all city employees who work to meet the needs of our residents experiencing fires, and to Red Cross and to NOAA for all your work in partnership with the city. So thank you, and thank you to my co-sponsors.
Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jean. Councilor Coletta?
Thank you, Chair, and I just want to again thank the maker of this, Councilor Louis-Jean, for bringing this forward. This is a very important topic, and clearly we have some things to do as a city to best support our residents. I heard a lot of emphasis on just affordable housing and making sure that we are supporting residents that way and giving them the resources they need to find an apartment, but then also afford that apartment later on. I just want to uplift that request of Councilor Louis-Jean that, $4,500 may not go far enough for a lot of the families in the city of Boston, particularly with rising rents. I do want to see a formalized process with building collapses and even flooding. We didn't even really get into flooding, but as sea level occurs, or coastal flooding occurs at a more frequent basis, we should be thinking about that and how that will impact my district and others who are water adjacent. I definitely heard the need for more supports for undocumented tenants and folks who have been displaced, seeing that the state's shelter system largely ignores them, which we have to work through and break down that barrier, but maybe a process with BHA to get them referred or automatically referred to the city voucher program. I definitely want to dive into renters insurance classes or community outreach when it comes to that, so maybe as part of the next conversation we can get some folks in here discussing that. But then definitely looking forward to developing some sort of revolving trust fund that's similar to Cambridge, that we could receive funds from private actors who want to help, and even residents who want to help, that largely do it through GoFundMe, and they have their own ways of dispersing the funds. And East Boston Mutual Aid was invited to be here today to discuss some of the great work that they've done in Eastie already, but if we can get them in the next conversation to talk about their equation and how they disperse funds for folks who have children, folks who are single but need more money based on their income level. So I look forward to those future conversations, and just thank you again, everybody, for being here and for your great work.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. I'll just confirm that we don't have any public testimony. Okay, so in that case, with great thanks to our nonprofit partners, not just for being here with us, but for everything that you do every day on this issue, and thanks to the co-sponsors, this hearing of the Boston City Council's Committee on City Services and Innovation Technology is adjourned. Thank you all.